and this is Christian-apologist.com, and I am here with Craig Reed, and we are doing our week 2 review, I should say, of a video that I saw on the Unbelievable channel, which was between Sean McDowell. Whoops, got my volume here. Turn my volume off. Hold on. Sorry, one sec, guys. Trying to find my volume. Can I find it? There. Okay. So sorry about that little mix up, but anyway, so we're going to review this this debate that we saw between Sean McDowell and Paulogia. And Paulogia is a YouTube atheist or anti-theist, and Sean McDowell is a Christian, and Justin Brierley is another Christian, and it was on the Unbelievable channel. So before we do that, I want to go ahead and say hi to Craig. So Craig, you want to come on here and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Craig Reed. I'm I have a YouTube channel, Craig Reed TCR, and I'm a Twitter apologist. I started here about, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago at this point. And you know, most of the people in the audience know who I am. You can go watch my videos. My videos are fun and informative.
Yeah, and you've got a different kind of personality where you go in and dissect things a lot. Like a lot of times you'll go in and look at videos and you take them apart a little bit, and then you make a video that has a little film of the water.
Yes,
and
yes. I have my go-to backgrounds.
The other day I spotted this. So there's definitely a lot of enthusiasm in his videos. So I highly recommend you guys go over there and subscribe to his channel, and you can find that in the description. So be sure to do that. So so should we get right into it? Get this debate?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's fire it up.
Fire up the grill. Here we go. So hold on. Let me just change the screen. Share screen. There we go. Okay. So now, even just looking at this look right here, Sean is looking pretty confident, I would say, right there in that particular clip.
Yeah,
So
he's ready.
he's got, and the thing about Sean is, just in case you guys don't know him, he is an assistant professor of apologetics, I think, at Biola University. And he's written a number of books, including a book I have right in front of me by him and his dad, and it's entitled Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It's a really thick, good book. And so Sean has a lot of academic knowledge. He would be a very tough competitor for anybody trying to go in there. I'd say he's one of the up and coming possible one-day replacements of William Lane Craig. He really does a great job of debating because he has so much knowledge and he teaches this stuff. So he's been faced with these questions for a while. And I'll give Paulogia some credit. Paulogia apparently was a Christian, a young earth creationist. He says on his Twitter account that he came to not believe in Christianity somehow and turned to atheism because he rejected the ideas of Ken Ham. And so he's got this YouTube channel where he has little cartoon characters and they talk about ham and eggs and stuff like that. Have you watched any of those videos, Craig?
Yeah, I watch a decent amount of Paulogia videos. I only really tune in when a lot of his videos are based on like debunking young earth creationism and debunking like certain types of Christians. And I don't really watch very many of those, but every once in a while he'll do like a standard hiddenness of God argument, or he'll do like that's one he's doing that I've watched. He had that stream with McDowell last week that I watched the whole thing. So when he does like a general Christian theology question, I'll usually watch it. But most of his content is geared towards debunking the person that most of it's geared towards who he was, like steering the person who he actually was away from, you know, the Garden of Eden, things like that. That's what I see.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I just saw, I mean, he's very active on YouTube. He's got a really active channel. Unbelievable. This is coming from the Unbelievable channel. So I would actually recommend you guys subscribe to these channels if you want that kind of content. So we've got Sean McDowell's, he's got an up and coming channel too. So he's out there, Unbelievable's out there, and Paulogia is out there. Everyone is out there being an activist. And so, including
so
us.
Active.
We are active.
Sign up. Do you watch his channel stuff?
Paulogia every once in a while. I'll catch it.
You had him on here, what, a few times with Shannon, right?
Yeah, I had him on my channel before. I kind of had a falling out with him. Not sure
Yeah,
why.
I noticed that.
Yeah,
he says he says a couple of negative tweets about you. Like, what?
oh yeah, and I'm like, I don't really know why that is. I don't know what I did to infuse such fury in that man, but whatever, it's just live and let live. If he doesn't like me, that's fine. I'm sure I'm not. And it's, I have to say, I give atheist and anti-theist and agnostics some credit who are active on the internet, because if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So thank you, atheists and agnostics. You fired me up. You've gotten rid of any apathy I had.
The origins of the I Hate Stephanie Club are always hard to pin.
Yeah. I don't really know where
why any one individual person joins the club of the I, because I saw him like half participators. Like, what? Where's this coming from? So I don't know where it comes from.
I figured, I would not actually, I stopped looking at his, I stopped reviewing his things except for this video, but I stopped doing that because I thought to myself, wait a second, I'm bringing him publicity and he says these things about me. And I think, why am I doing that? But in this particular video, my feeling is I'm bringing publicity more to the Unbelievable channel and also to Sean McDowell than to Paulogia. But I'm going to try to be as fair as possible because I will give him credit for any good arguments that he has.
Right. And I still chat with him on Twitter. I chatted with him yesterday about, what were they talking about? There's a movie from Paul Schrader, First Reformed. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't. Is it good?
I started trying to watch it. It's Paul Schrader's the guy who wrote Taxi Driver, and it's kind of about a priest who's struggling with his faith. It's supposed to be really good. It came out like a year and a half ago. Paul Vanderklay and John Buck had a stream where they discussed it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I want to say hi to John Lloyd. He's in the chat and he says hi, and he says part of the I Love SJ Club. So thank you.
Yes. Yes,
that's a better club. that's a kinder, more gentle club, right?
Yes, it's a kinder, gentler club.
So going back to the Schuyler fiction, the kinder,
and
more
we may have added Josh to the I Love SJ Club.
No, I think he's in the I tolerate.
Yeah. I kind of can deal with SJ now. A lot of people are in that club, and then something happens, and then they join the I Hate SJ Club. I'm never sure why.
I know. I don't even know what happened with Paulogia. I feel like I've been nice to him. I don't even know. And the same thing with Shannon Q. She also, because they're dating, she also is in the I Hate SJ Club. And I just, whatever, these people, it's crazy. One day, maybe I think what would happen if I would actually, one day, here's what would happen. They want me to get on there. And I think he said something to this effect one day. If I got on Twitter and said, I lost all my faith, I have no faith anymore, I'm a member of an atheist now, I'm the atheist, mad, and there's no faith, there's no God. I think all of a sudden they would all start liking me.
Yeah. Then
that's what they're looking for. Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah. But I'm not going to do that, guys. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. So sorry to disappoint. But should we go ahead and go to the video?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, here we go.
Response to that, because I think this is an important point, is initially asking, what do we know about who claimed to have seen the Jesus resurrected, and were those the people who then ended up getting killed for that claim? So we'll allow Sean to respond in a moment's time. We're doing a deep dive into an important, you could say niche, but it's still an important area of Christian thought and biblical study, the fate of the apostles. There's often an argument out there in Christian circles that the disciples of Jesus, would they have been willing to suffer and die for something they knew to be a lie? And the person who's done quite a bit of work looking into that is Sean McDowell in his book, The Fate of the Apostles, and being challenged on it today in today's show by Paul Enns. And we'll continue the discussion in just a moment.
What I want to invite Roger to comment on is, why couldn't the mental realm include an infinite consciousness?
It's too much like us. It's too much like putting it like the Greek views of the gods in some sense. They were too much like us.
They were finite and contingent. Here we're talking about a metaphysically necessary source.
I admire this noble aspiration to find the highest possible ideal. It's almost as if you're proposing a new religion.
There's a cool debate on
it's not a new religion. It's what it is.
That debate that they're advertising right there, the Alistair McGrath, Brett Weinstein debate, that's a killer debate. It's
Is
really
it? I
good.
haven't seen it.
Yeah, if you want to, we should do that on one of the,
I'm one of
because
the
it's
another
really
one of
good.
these.
Yeah,
I'd
Brett
like to do
Weinstein
that.
is one of these, like, he's like an Adam Friended. He's very pro-religion as kind of like, secular utility, evolutionary feature that allows us to be like socially coherent and have morals. So it's a really interesting debate, and that's where he brings up his idea of metaphorical truth. So it's definitely worth checking
interesting.
out.
Yeah, no, that definitely sounds good. So, okay. So, and I like the music that he has playing in the background. I haven't figured out.
It makes it seem suspenseful, like you're watching like an action movie. Bum, bum.
Yeah, I got to figure out how to get music on my channel, not for this kind of video where we're debate reviewing, but for the other kinds of videos where I'm just talking, like the background stuff, and even up front. I haven't figured out how to. Obviously, you can see I'm missing some technological know-how.
Yeah, you're talking to the wrong. But it's like the lake in the background and me talking, and it's like kind of crackly. That's the sum total of my like technological prowess. People are like, what on earth am I watching?
I know
people can watch this, Craig, right? Yeah, I kind of do.
One of your videos, there was like a person walking into the lake.
Yeah, everyone always noticed that the guy was walking out in the water. Yeah. I didn't even know that was there. I just downloaded it from, I downloaded like what I thought was just a nice little mellow scene and then like shrunk it so I could make videos out of it. I think that's my wife. Hold on. Okay. I think I have to get that.
So while he does that, I'll play this.
Is something that sits in the same place. It addresses some of the same needs, but it is not founded on the same principle.
If the New Testament says that Jesus did X, Y, and Z, did he do it or not?
I don't think it's a story that's made by committee. Am I going to have a later literary genius who comes up with a great story like this? Or am I going to say, no, Jesus is the genius and somehow that story has basically been preserved?
One of the things just to point out, I don't know if Craig's back yet, but one of the things to point out about Bart Ehrman is he wrote this book called Misquoting Jesus. And in his second edition, there's this little quote in the appendix where he basically says that the core content of Christianity has been well preserved. And he's in agreement with his former mentor, Bruce Metzger, who also believes that the core tenets of Christianity have been preserved. So anything we have in the New Testament, it's good to go as far as the resurrection. So I would just say one of the things I like to point out is people say, well, I think even Josh Bowen, I think one of the things that he was pointing out is because he felt like there was some errors in the Old Testament, which I haven't found any. I haven't found any that I would call provable in either the Old or the New. So I would say it's inerrant in my opinion, but it's not even the Bible that brought me to Christianity. I barely had one in my house. I had like a half Bible in my house. It's Jesus. So no matter what the Bible comes in with, I'm actually fine if someone found that, the big argument that Bart Ehrman has is he'll say, the account at the very end of the book of Mark maybe wasn't in the original, and also the adulterous story of a woman getting stoned and Jesus saying, he who has without sin cast the first stone.
Yeah, I've heard that. I was in a debate with someone on Twitter with an atheist about that. And like they missed the whole point. It's like the argument is that was put in after the fact, right? That wasn't in the original text or something.
Yeah, and it's like, who cares?
Exactly. It's the spirit of Jesus. It's like the spirit that it's saying is don't be judgmental if you think you're Mr. Righteous. So the reason why they put it in, if they put it in after the fact, is it matches what people think is like true to Jesus, true to the spirit of Christianity. So that's how I look at it. It's like whether it was literally in the first text isn't really that important.
I don't think it's important either. And I would think that the church fathers wouldn't allow something to go in there if it didn't happen. I'm thinking maybe what happened was they recorded it later because they realized this is a story that's been passed down by word of mouth. And we maybe should put it in the Bible because it did occur. And it is a lesson learned. It's got a great lesson to it. Right.
But my point to the person when I quoted it was the lesson. I didn't even know at that time that it was disputed. And they answered back, you realize that wasn't in the Bible. Like, dude, that's not the point. The point is, we aren't supposed to judge you. And that's a clear message, whether it was put in after the fact or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I want to say Ronan Kanushi is saying that we can enter YouTube copyright-free music and 30,000 copyright-free tracks into... Cool. into our search box. So that's all we got to do. Type in YouTube copyright free music and we can get music on our channel. It'd be cool to have in the background, don't you think?
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Unless it's like terrible, like copyright free music sounds a little bit suspicious. Like it's this terrible, like, you know.
Well, it could be like, you know, IP does a lot of that. He'll have music playing in the background. It makes it more pleasant to listen to. So it's just kind of like, you know, it's not something where somebody's singing in the background. It's just sort of musical instruments. So I like that. So I have to figure that out. So thank you, Ronan. Thank you, everybody. So let's go. Big conversation show. Sounds exciting.
Welcome back. We're debating are martyred apostles good evidence for the resurrection? Sean McDowell and Paul Enns are my guests today. Sean McDowell wrote a scholarly book on the subject, The Fate of the Apostles, and has been critiqued recently by YouTuber Paulogia, aka Paul Enns, in a video to which Sean responded. I saw some of the back and forth and thought, hey, why don't we get these guys on Unbelievable and have it out on air and on video as well. By the way, today's show is available from our YouTube channel as well as the podcast and radio show as usual. So in that last section, Sean, Paul was saying essentially, yeah, but just how many of the accounts can we actually trust? He brought up the fact that he's got some doubts about the historicity of Luke Acts. We don't really know who the writer is, where the sources were coming from. So we may have literally only maybe 2, maybe 3 at most credible sources of people who claim they were eyewitnesses of Jesus' resurrection. And then, of course, we're going to have to debate what actually happened to them as well at some point in the program. So but we're still here on the first stage of asking, well, were there credible eyewitnesses?
I want to just say something here that I'm thinking about. He's saying eyewitnesses as authors, I believe. I don't think he's trying to say that the eyewitnesses weren't there, because here's the deal. The Gospels were written during, in Paul's books, were written during the lifetimes of people who could easily refute them. And if you made mention of specific people, which Paul did, Paul mentioned a whole bunch of people in his epistles, and there's a bunch of people mentioned in the Gospels and in the book of Acts. So we have all of these people, and those who were alive could easily say, why are you putting me in there as somebody who was standing at the bottom of the cross? I wasn't there. But all of these people could easily have refuted him. And we've got Mother Mary, we've got the other Marys, we've got all kinds of people mentioned as eyewitnesses in Jesus's lifetime. And I think that,
right. So
that's
Paul
a point that has
means,
to be made.
But the 2, I forget if we've already covered this in what we've covered so far, but Paul gives 2 people, the Apostle Paul and Peter, right?
Yeah.
And he's cool with both of them. That's enough to build a really strong, you know, not strong enough to necessarily convince a skeptic, but to make a really strong evidentiary case. I mean, that's basically almost the entire canon of the New Testament, and the rock upon which I build, you know, you, Peter, are the rock, you know, on you I build the church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So those are like the 2 most important people that you could possibly cite. And I think he said he's cool with they existed, and B, they gave testimony to the resurrection, that they believe they saw a resurrected Jesus. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. I'm not 100% sure, but at least with Paul, I think he thinks Paul believed, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and Paul did. I mean, Paul is the one who wrote 1 Corinthians 15, which we've mentioned last time, is this early creed that even Bart Ehrman and others who are skeptics claim that the early creed was written within a few years of Jesus's resurrection. And in that creed, it says that Jesus appeared to Cephas, and they even refer to him as Cephas. That gives other evidence that it's a really old creed, because that was sort of Peter's original name. So he appeared to Cephas, then he appeared to the 12, then to the 500, then to James, Jesus's brother. So we've got any of those people could easily have said, wait a second, what are you writing down? Why'd you say that? He didn't appear to, so anybody who, even if he said then to the 500, there, and then he said some of whom are sleeping, that means some of them had passed away already, but others could have said, well, yes, I was in that crowd, or yes, I know there was a crowd. So that sort of thing, you know what I'm saying?
Right. But he actually gives us enough. He gives us enough that he as far as I know, I forget if we've already covered it or not. We'll see what he says in the what's about to come. So
let's check this out.
To the resurrection that did potentially get martyred. So where do you want to go with this, Sean?
Oh,
So
I cut him off too soon. So he's talking about eyewitnesses who got martyred. So that's what the evidence is. So actually, we do have evidence in Acts that James, the son of Zebedee, was martyred. And we know that James, the son of Zebedee, was one of the apostles. So there's another eyewitness who was martyred. So that's, all right, I'll keep going.
Look at this in a couple different directions. And each of these we could spend extensive time unpacking. But I think when we look at Acts, I'm not willing to set it aside in the same manner that Paul is. I don't think most scholars are either. In fact, Edward Meyer, who is arguably the 20th century's most renowned Greco-Roman scholar of antiquity, he said, quote, "In spite of its more restricted content, Acts bears the same character of the greatest historians of A. Polybius, A. Livy, and many others." When we look at Luke and we look at Acts, we compare it to what we know with Josephus and independently with the writings of Paul, we see a remarkable matchup between them. Now, there's differences on a smaller scale, but we see a remarkable matchup on the bigger picture of it, which is pretty good confirmation. I mean, a significant amount of Acts scholars would say this is at least minimally a historical monograph telling us the historical reconstruction of the early church. Even Bart Ehrman would agree with that. So willing to set that aside, there's a very good case, and I could listen to dozens of names of people and places and cities that Luke got precisely correct. The flip side of that, that's only one source. In Gary Habermas's research, he's shown that the vast majority of scholars agree that the disciples believed they had appearances of the risen Jesus. This is I forget his number, 95% plus. And this isn't just an appeal to scholars, it's an appeal to the evidence and appeal to the scholars that the disciples all believed they had seen the risen Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean they all believed that he had risen. Some would say hallucinations, etc. We could talk about that. But the scholarly consensus is that the disciples believed that they had appearances of the risen Jesus. And there's a reason for this. It's because the appearance claims are early and they're multiply attested. So they're early, for example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which I heard in one of your discussions, Paul, you concede is probably 5 years from the time itself of, say, the death of Jesus. 5-year window, we have this creed that Paul says Jesus died, was buried, appeared to me, appeared to James, appeared to 12, and appeared to 500. The earliest record we have has the resurrection at the heart of it and the claim that Jesus appeared to James in particular. Paul says he appeared to him. He appears distinctly to Peter, and he lists the rest of the apostles. Now, that's not only in Paul's letters. We also see that in the Gospels. We see that in Acts. We see that in the early church fathers. So consistently, we have this claim that the first belief the apostles had, which is publicly proclaimed, this doesn't appear decades later in legendary material. From the earliest record we have at the beginning, these apostles are standing up saying, we've seen the risen Jesus. We will put ourselves in harm's way for this, which doesn't prove it's true, but it shows that they actually believed it. So that's where I would start to go with this.
Yeah, well, let me rewind a little bit. So Acts, of course, people who work at secular colleges who aren't bound by, that the Bible is true and inerrant, actually think that Josephus was one of the sources. We know that the author of Luke Acts used many sources. Most of them think that Josephus was one of the sources that he used in his book. So it doesn't surprise anyone that Josephus occasionally lines up with Luke when we feel that that's one of the sources that he used. The book of Acts really doesn't line up with Paul's missions, and we can go into that if we want to. I don't want to sidetrack, but I really don't think that Acts.
So he's explicitly disagreeing with something that Sean just said. Sean said that Acts does line up with Paul's journeys. I've actually seen writings where they've done a timeline on Paul's travels through Galatia and through these different places in Ephesus. And they've shown that it does correspond completely with the book of Acts. So I'm not sure where Paul's coming in with that one. Have you heard anything on that?
I was just thinking that. No, I'm not. But I'm relatively certain that if he brought it up, he doesn't go into it in this debate, but I'm pretty sure that there would be some basis for him bringing that up. Like, he wouldn't just say that apropos of nothing. So there's probably some books out there that are questioning the, I guess, what is he saying? Like, when you look at like Galatians and it says what Paul was here at this date and Paul was doing this, and then Paul, when that it doesn't match up with which book specifically.
So the book of Acts. So what we know in the book of Acts is, first it starts talking about Peter, and then it starts talking about Paul's travels. And interestingly, it doesn't mention neither of their martyrdoms, which would appear that it was written prior to their martyrdoms, which occurred in 60. But this idea of Paul, so what we know that Paul does in the book of Acts is he's traveling all around. At one point, he's in Jerusalem, and he has to leave Jerusalem because 40 people decided that they were going to fast until they killed him, 40 of the Pharisees. So he flees Jerusalem and he starts going around. So I guess you could, and I've seen this where people have taken a timeline and figured out exactly when Paul was in all these different places. And,
right, but then it's brought up again in Galatians, and there's references to other things where you could piece together his activities, right? That's what he's saying, that they don't correspond.
He's saying they don't. From what I've seen, I actually saw a timeline and put him like it would have in the year 52 he's here, and in the year 54 he's there, and they were working it all out, because Paul did give a lot of good information about when he was in Damascus. He traveled all about, and so I'd be. A lot of times people build assumptions into these things, though. So, like, I have to say this from the Christian standpoint. If I read the books, I assume they're correct. And so then I would look at outside material and be skeptical of that. Whereas he takes the opposite approach. He would assume that the information in the Bible
he'd be looking for a way to find a discrepancy that may or may not exist. But the only thing I'm pointing out is that if he says that there's he wouldn't bring that up apropos of nothing.
Yeah, he's got something.
So there's books out there that say that they don't match. Now it's no one like Bart Ehrman or someone really well known, because we probably have already heard of it, is my guess. So, but there's got to be books out there that say that Paul's timeline doesn't match.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to try to prove that. So, all right, let's keep going.
And the Pauline letters line up very well at all. But when we're talking here now about the First Corinthians Creed and all those kind of things, and Gary Habermas, I've asked Gary this question: when you ask scholars, did the disciples believe it? Yeah, they did. But if you change it, did you say, did Paul believe it? And then did Peter proclaim it? And did you go down the line? Did Peter, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James son of Alphaeus, Simon son of, did you go, when you go down the line, when you group them all together, they have to say yes, because Peter and Paul are well attested. But when you look at all the rest of them, the scholars don't agree when you list them by name.
Okay. Yeah. Sean, what do you say to that? I guess there's points there about, like, for
example, Bartholomew. Okay. So he's taking there are some minor apostles who didn't write any books. And so we don't have their specific testimony. And I think he's trying to sort of capitalize on that, because we don't have the testimonies of all of these different people. We don't have testimony of James, son of Alphaeus, for example. We only have John, son of Zebedee. We don't have James, son of Zebedee. So we don't have everybody. So he's saying, okay, well, therefore, they don't have the testimonies, even though a lot of times they appear in the book of Acts. He's going to say that even though they were there with the 12, they were all in the very beginning of the book of Acts. We're going to say that they didn't testify to it, because they didn't write books. But
he's saying, the thing that I was saying is that he's definitely giving Paul and Peter, which means that there's a, let's say if this was on a scale of how much evidence this represents, and a Christian was trying to, a really committed Christian was trying to say it's 100, he's admitting that it represents some evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So what's my only point is that we should just take him at what he thinks the knowable facts are, because we're trying to convince him. So if he says it's 20 out of 100, then we go, okay, fine, 20 out of 100. Now that's our evidence for the resurrection. Let's move on to another subject. You see what I'm saying? Just agree with him, and then strengthen, like, what he's given us is a lot. Mm-hmm. Paul and Peter is the two most important figures in the New Testament altogether, maybe outside of Jesus and John the Baptist. So he's given us a lot to go with, where we can, he's given us enough logos. What was the thing that you were talking about? The logos of
the logical. Debate. Yeah, he's given us a logical, because if we just use Paul's epistles and we use the 1 Corinthians 15 and we use that kind of stuff, I mean, what if that's all we had was 1 Corinthians 15? That's it. And then we have their martyrdoms evidence outside of the Bible. And you know what I don't understand? I don't understand why he doesn't give James, the half-brother of Jesus, credit, because he also wrote a book, and he also was documented by Josephus as having been martyred.
Right. And I'm not even sure on the scholarship on James. That's not under dispute. Like some of the Pauline epistles I know are disputed, like Hebrews, but as James probably isn't under dispute at all, is it?
I haven't heard. I haven't heard anything on James being disputed, so I'm not sure. I really don't understand why that's not mentioned. And I mean, we have even Paul mentioning his encounter with James, the brother of Jesus. We know from Josephus. I think you got a little bit of a clicking noise.
Shit, that's me walking around again. Every time I walk around, it starts banging.
Your phone does.
Because I'm listening on a headphone, and that starts rubbing up against it.
There we go.
Coming to get me.
They found you. No, but I mean, that's the thing I don't really understand about his argument is why not also include James, the half brother of Jesus, in this whole deal? That's what I don't understand.
I don't know. Usually with Paul's pretty straightforward in terms of most of his arguments have some sort of logical predicate where he's not fabricating stuff to, like, he's not pretending that there's all this evidence that Jesus doesn't exist so he can move the ball and make a fake argument. Most of his stuff has a logical predicate that's, at least there's a plausible reason why he's saying it. It's not him just trying to make issues so he can pretend. So there's probably something that he's basing it on, but I have no idea what.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, what I just said?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There is something. He's got something from somebody. And I also agree with you. I don't think it's Bart Ehrman, or we might have heard it before, but I do know that Bart has a new book out. So there could be something in the new book that I haven't heard.
Well, Bart's new book is Heaven and Hell, I thought. Isn't that what his new book is?
Oh, yeah. That's true. It wouldn't be on this kind of thing. So I find that whole thing with hell, I think, is kind of funny. I find atheists have a kind of a really major interest in hell, more than I ever had even thought about growing up. Like, I never even thought about hell. That never really entered my mind.
The only time I started thinking about it was when I was, prior to me becoming a Christian, when I was in my 20s. And I was like, I used to think about it a lot, but I was living like really dissolute. Like those were in my like dark drinking and drug days. That's the only time that I ever really thought about it all that much. And then when I first became a Christian, I thought about it a lot, because me and another one of my Christians would hand wring over it all the time. We'd go like, how could it be fair? How could it be just? How could God ever do that? Even to Adolf Hitler. So we would talk about it the way like an atheist or agnostic talks about it. Like, I get it. I get why they think that it's cruel, But
wouldn't they think it's cruel if God forced them to go to heaven and be around him all the time? Because that's what they do. They're rejecting.
They really dislike him that much, sure. I mean, yeah. The part about it that's where it becomes weird is that none of us are God, So we make educated guesses based on the Bible. And like my educated guess is that there are people who are truly evil who probably wind up in some form of damnation close to what the scripture talks about. That would be like your
Stalin.
Himmler.
Stalin
or
Himmler.
Your Mengele. But it wouldn't be like your average atheist. There's no genuinely like malignant, evil person in the atheist community that I would think would qualify under those grounds. No, I could be wrong. That's just the thing that makes the most sense to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I almost wonder, the Catholics have this idea of purgatory. And I always wonder about that, because Paul said something about the second or third heaven. I haven't really looked into that too much, but I'm wondering if there's like a waiting ground, where you're kind of hanging out.
That's predicated on scripture. Almost everything the theories that you hear, the waiting ground idea comes out of a couple of scriptures. It's really like a stretch, but it comes from somewhere.
It does, because it says the judgment day. So even with Jesus, when he sees the demons, they're like, what? It's not our time yet. It's not judgment day or something like that. Why have you come now?
Right. So yes, there does seem to be, you die and there's some sort of period where you're in some sort of limbo akin to a decision. So it's possible. I mean, the part about it where it gets like, the other part about it is that hell isn't just exclusive to the Bible. It's an idea in a lot of different theologies, a lot of different mythologies, Hades, the idea that bad people get punished in the afterlife is fairly common. It's in Islam, it's in, it's not just the Bible. It's like that part of it I always sort of felt is true, that you're going to have to answer for the deeds in this life. And if you're an evil person, you aren't going to want to face the music.
You're not going to like it.
Yeah, you're going to be really, whether that means you're going to be damned for all time, you're just not going to like it. It's like when I got caught drinking in school and I went to the principal, I got caught on like Friday night and I had to go to the principal with my mother on Monday. The going to the principal's office was like the worst experience of your life because you're caught. Your mom's there with you and you were caught drinking in school and something you're going to face the music. Like it's that times 1,000, you did it, whatever it is that you did. So it's not going to be a pleasant experience, even if God is really as merciful as you and I would like to believe he is. It's still going to be a terrifying experience. That's how I see it. And you're going to wish that you hadn't done, I really wish I hadn't killed that guy now. You're going to really wish you hadn't done whatever it is you did. That's how I see it.
See, I see it. I agree with you. And the regret, this whole idea of regret, when people talk about their deathbed, they get to their deathbed or they're sitting in the hospital and they think to themselves, how could I have done my life differently? That itself, I think, is going to be a very painful experience.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that should even be a painful experience. Like a secular
all your life.
person, right, should actually kind of welcome that type of self-examination.
Yeah,
because that's something you could ask yourself: Am I doing what I should be doing with my life right now, in the here and now?
I do that at a little exercise in my leadership classes. I talk about just said, what do you want on your epitaph? How do you want your family to remember you? And just have them think about, wait a second, if they're doing something wrong, can you fix it?
Yeah, totally.
So that's.
I mean, I see it as a form of accountability. Not necessarily something to like shrink back from, but something to welcome. If you think you're going to face, I understand why a lot of people were raised fundamentalists. So they think it's like God's going to get mad at you for every little, you watched a movie about, you watched a horror movie, God's going to send you to hell. Because that's how a lot of them were how it's been presented to them. Every single thing you do is going to be. You know what I'm saying? Like there's no mercy involved in at all in how it's framed to them. So I get why
I get that. I have to say, I get why some of the people we encounter on Twitter, you can tell like they're really angry people. I think are kids almost, maybe in their teens. I see some people just as being rebellious against their parents, and some parents are way overly restrictive. I'm trying to remember the examples. I've talked to people whose parents are like that.
Totally. I've examples with atheists I've talked to. There was one girl who I think we were both talking to, who when she was a 14-year-old girl wasn't allowed to go see New Kids on the Block. I'm like, Kids on the Block? what kind of like a doofus parent is like, no, that's too evil. That's too hardcore. It's like, that's like a normal teenage, it's lame, sure, but it's not like destructive, Shouldn't say Korn. I want to go see stay out drinking till 5 a.m. and go see like Black Sabbath. Said New Kids on the Block.
Yeah. I think that's one of those things is when you tell, actually this is in psychology. There's this thing called the white cow study. And what they do is they put these people in a room and they put them with a bell in front of them. And they say, whatever you do, don't think about the white cow. I mean, just do not think about the white cow. You don't want to have anything to do with the white cow. They showed them pictures of white cows and they're like, don't think about it.
Nobody succeeds.
They leave the room and the bells start ringing. If you do think about the white cow, you have to ring the bell. Everybody's thinking about the white cow. And it's like when you go on a diet and you just say, I'm not going to eat pizza. I'm not going to eat pizza. And so you're thinking so much about pizza that you have to have it. And that's why I say, don't restrict your kids so much, because then they're going to start, thinking, oh my gosh, I have to have that. I have to watch that movie.
Yeah. There's a normal way to where even like the angry, like Old Testament God is, if you see it as like a stern parent, that these are the lines you don't cross because it's healthy and right for you. There's even a healthy way to see that, but but for how a lot of these people were raised, where it was just totally exaggerated. You know, if you watch the wrong TV show, you're going to burn in hell. You know, God's going to punish you if you click on, you know what I mean? So yeah, there's a totally a balanced, sane way to approach this. And, you know, I think some of them are definitely running from a framing that, you know, wasn't healthy.
Yeah, I think that would say why some of them reject God, because they're like, oh my gosh, if he's really that kind of God, I don't want anything to do with him. But he's not. I mean, they what they don't do a lot is look at Jesus. And that just reminded me of something. I'll say this really quick before we put them back on, and then you can comment if you want. But I was with Veckel and G-Man last night, and we were reviewing evilbible.com.
Evil Bibles, that's the name of the website. It's awesome.
It is so funny. I mean, I started laughing so hard when I was realizing, because there's this one part, what would Jesus do? And they're like, Jesus wants to be a child abuser, and these completely misinterpretations and misrepresentations of the Bible, and the verses they put in there to support that were ridiculous. And it just made me laugh. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's like this is written by a 14-year-old really angry kid whose parents were restricting him too much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's even for like most anti-theists and atheists, it's pretty easy to understand Jesus as, you know, love, the voice of loving, kind, and compassionate. It's easy for most people to perceive Jesus that way. There are a couple of weird scriptures where they go, see, even Jesus, you know, but it's actually like totally deliberately misinterpreting. Like, you know, you should hate your family. See, Jesus wants you to hate your parents. I'm sure that one was in there.
Yeah, well, that it was. And just in case anybody does come upon that one, think about what Jesus is really saying there. So you've got a big Muslim population right now, for example, where people are, you know, you call it apostasy if they left the Muslim faith, and they're disowned from their parents in a lot of cases if they leave the Muslim faith. And you've also got Jesus making appearances quite a bit in the Middle East right now, and those reports are coming out. And so when they leave their families, they might have to, it's like hate your family and go for Jesus because the family wants them to stay Muslim. And so that's where you see a context that could be applied to that kind of verse.
The context is like, as you know, another scripture that's along the same lines is a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. If you're raised, your family doesn't necessarily mean to hold you back or define you, but they do. That's a common human reality. You know, how you're defined when you're 13, 14 years old is according to your family. So in a sense, they're your enemy because they're limiting you to what you could become. That's how I always view those type of things.
That's a good way that's another good way to view it. And then I brought up Rene. Remember Rene and how he thought Jesus was evil because he cursed a fig tree and he sent the demons into some pigs?
Yeah, he struggled with that one. The poor pigs. Yeah, that was a unique one, at least. That's like he's one of the few people who went on that one when it's like, you know, I can't believe Jesus would be so mean to these pigs.
The pigs ran into the water, though. Jesus didn't force the pigs to run in the water. That kind of thing, it cracks me up. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just, I mean, look at what you mentioned Muslim hell. And I was just thinking, Muhammad says that there are more women. Women are overpopulating hell. Like, that's really nice. If you're a Muslim woman, think about that.
I didn't know he said that.
Yeah. And he said something to the effect of, you know, we need 2 women to testify for any one man because we have half brains of men.
That's what he said?
Something to that effect. But yeah, that's what it meant. I caught some of that from David Wood.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So yeah, good stuff. All right, here we go.
Paul wonders whether Paul and Acts agree all that much. Josephus could be a source, therefore not surprising if it agrees in places with that. But I think the main point that Paul has here is, okay, you can talk about well attested with a couple of names, but the rest, there's basically silence on as to what they did or didn't witness, and indeed the nature of their deaths, I suppose, in the end as well, which I feel we should get to at some point in the discussion. But
yeah, very quick. It's not a solid case that Acts just borrows Josephus. We see overlap, but when they overlap, things are described very differently. Some stuff is included, some stuff is left out. Doesn't have the marks of somebody who's just copying another document. That's not as said as I think you made it sound. But second, here's what we have. We have distinct references to Paul, James, and the apostles. We have this in multiple early early documents that we've talked about. Now, people say, well, it doesn't mention Bartholomew. Well, it doesn't mention Thomas. So does this count? And to me, right now, a lot of people are watching this show, The Last Dance, with Michael Jordan and the Bulls from the 97-98 season. Well, if in one of these shows it shows up the Bulls that are late for a game, the announcer would probably say, yeah, Michael Jordan and the Bulls are late. Because really, everybody went to see Jordan, not everybody else. So then could you say, well, all we can conclude is that Jordan was late because it doesn't mention Scottie Pippen. It doesn't mention Kukoc. It doesn't mention Steve Kerr. It doesn't mention Cartwright. Therefore, we can only conclude that Jordan and some unknown group, now especially if we both say this, but the Pistons say and confirm this as well in a public area in which people prefer or deny this, you would be over skeptical to reject that the Bulls showed up unless you had some particular reason to think Kerr was not included in that group. So that's why the apostles as a group, we have good reason to think that Jesus appeared to them. There's no other early testimony.
But even those accounts like you're talking about, like Paul's letters don't mention the apostles at all, other than in Galatians where he talks about Cephas and
what about 1 Corinthians 15? What about 1 Corinthians?
That's before they get into
apostles.
Yeah, it's not just Paul mentions John. Paul mentions Mark. There's a lot of different mentions actually Mark is the writer, the gospel writer. He's not one of the apostles, but Paul mentions him, and he mentions James too, the brother of Jesus.
I got to make 2 quick points about the Bulls because he mentioned the Bulls before we go.
I thought that was a great comparison, by the way.
Yeah, it's a really good comparison. But have you heard of that documentary he's talking about?
Yeah, I have.
Apparently, it makes Michael Jordan look like you always thought he was this really nice, like genial guy, and it makes him look like this really like ruthless, harsh competitor, like behind the scenes. That's what I read about. I haven't watched it yet, but it makes it like he was kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like Michael Jordan's public images of this really nice, like, I always thought Schwarzenegger was this really nice guy. And apparently he's totally ruthless and hardcore. And then what?
I was going to say Schwarzenegger is one thing I heard Schwarzenegger say that I think is really funny is he had a really rigorous training schedule, growing up and all that kind of stuff, working out. I mean, he was really into working out. He'd work out a few hours and he had a very, very busy schedule and he set for himself and he had really high bar. And someone said to him something about, don't you get 8 hours of sleep? And he's like, no, he only gets 6 hours of sleep. Sleep faster.
Yeah. No, I only get 4 hours sleep faster.
So I haven't seen that. That'll be interesting. You would guess though that Michael Jordan was highly competitive because look how successful he was.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I noticed that with Kobe Bryant when he would do interviews, like all he was calculating, like he wanted to be the best, and he was being compared to like Shaq, and he's like, now it's clear that I'm the best. You know how I view these things, guys. Like it was just so like they're so one track in their consuming passion to like dominate, So yeah, it would make sense that you'd have to have a ruthless side to be that much better, I guess, right?
Oh, I mean, just imagine you barely anybody goes pro, and then you're at the top of the game in the pro league, like Michael Jordan.
Right, and you're basically considered the best player of all time.
Yeah, and he was. I mean, I remember growing up in Chicago, he was a rock star. Everybody talked about him.
Yeah, and the standard of like people would say before, if you were a good player, like you scored 20 in a game, it'd be like, what did Michael Jordan score? Oh, 35, 45,
Yeah.
What on earth? And it had as much to do with it's kind of what I've been talking about in my videos with debates. It has as much to do with presence of mind than anything else, because he was so focused and so concentrated that he's not like that much better in terms of his actual talent. He's not that much stronger or faster than everybody else. He's kind of along the same lines. He was just that much more focused,
Yeah, he's definitely really good. All right, so here we go.
That's a creed that Paul didn't get himself. He admits, I didn't get this. I didn't witness this. I'm not a witness to this. This is a nursery rhyme. Sorry.
But he did say at the very end of the creed that Jesus also appeared to him, the one abnormally born. Remember that?
Yes.
So you have to remember that. So here we go.
I will take that back. This is a creed that was learned that they that I agree was early, as you say. I'm with you that 1 Corinthians 15 creed is early, but like Acts, after they choose Matthias and then there's Pentecost, even Acts doesn't talk about the rest of these people. Like, so the only story I need to think.
He's forgetting something. Acts does also make a specific mention to the brothers of Jesus. They were there at the very beginning, and Mother Mary was there at the very beginning and mentioned in Acts. So we do have that listed in Acts. We've got very specific details, but Acts really traces Peter and Paul the most. And like you said, they're the stars.
Yeah, but they're the beating heart of the church. I mean, they're pretty much everything. So if that's what Paul is willing to give to us, then that's fine. We should build off of what he gives to us. We're not going to convince him. We're not going to convince him that the resurrection happened based on any of the available evidence, because it would have to be a lot more overwhelming. But he'd be able to say there's some evidence for the resurrection, or there's some evidence for the truth of Christianity based on the testimony of Peter and the testimony of the Apostle Paul. So that's good enough, and then we'll move on to other things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also want to say, just piggyback on something that Paul did say there. He does do this little making fun of Christians thing with his "For the Bible tells me so" and those kind of videos that he makes. And the other one that he just mentioned, kind of referring to 1 Corinthians 15 as if it's a nursery rhyme.
Yeah, and then he backtracked and apologized.
He does something on his videos though that I think is interesting. I'll just call it interesting. And Mike Winger pointed this out. He has the cartoons of himself with these like big burly muscles. And then when he does the apologist, it'll be like a head with this little teeny, really little body. Have you noticed that?
I noticed Mike Winger pointed out. I mean, I guess you could say it's projection, but it's also like to point it out, who cares? But yeah, it's probably a form of, but it's also kind of playful, so it's like a play. If it's a diss, it's a playful diss. It's not something that I get excited about necessarily. I mean, if he were to put me on there, he'd make me with muscles, or I'd have words with him. But other than that, I can't imagine.
It's like, well, that's the thing. If you're the guy who's on there and he's got, it's usually guys, but he's got some females in there too, but he's got these little teeny bodies. And so I could see it's just funny how he makes himself out versus them. He doesn't have himself with a little teeny body. So
right. But it's definitely like a playful diss. Though.
Yeah. I mean, it's his
not
humor.
Like a big deal.
No, it's not a big deal. Although I don't think Mike Winger liked it. I can say that. So, but okay, here we go.
I think may have been part of oral tradition as opposed to being witnessed by that person, is the ascension, which of course, if I don't believe the resurrection, I'm probably not giving a lot of credence to Acts 1 ascension either. So like it's not as many sources. And then when you talk about the church fathers, that's 2nd century, 3rd century stuff that isn't the kind of evidence I'm looking for. I'm looking for, because those are people attesting to people things that they couldn't have seen. Whether or not we can be confident that there's a large group of people, and I think it's like 2 or 3, who were sincerely believing that Jesus rose from the dead. And then we're going out saying that they did it. I don't know.
So when scholars are looking at a historical fact, we don't have to assume all of Acts, all John, all the Gospels are true. We ask, is a claim, an event, or a saying multiply attested in different genres and in different books? And when it comes to the appearances of Jesus, that's exactly what we find. So in Acts, we have Peter preaching this message of death, resurrection of Jesus, and the burial, along and speaking on behalf of the apostles themselves. He's the spokesman for them. We go to 1 Corinthians 15. The earliest source we have is a distinct reference of Jesus appearing to them. We have the 4 Gospels. And even if we only include Matthew, Mark, Luke, and 1, we also have John. And then we have the early sources on top of this. So the claims that Jesus appeared to people, or at least the apostles believed that Jesus appeared to them, is early and it's multiply attested. That's why the vast majority of scholars will conclude that they at least had experiences that they believed were of the risen Jesus.
I don't want to maybe spend too much more time now on the actual. I accept that you guys are going to have a difference of opinion on how reliable these accounts are and the witnesses and so on. I feel we must get to, before our time runs out, the evidence for the actual martyrdom accounts as well, because of course that's equally an important part of this. Now, is it your claim, Paul, essentially that in your view that we really only have any evidence, if any, for a couple of apostles potentially having been martyred for their faith? And you obviously dispute as well exactly whether they fit the criteria of martyr anyway. I mean, give us, I suppose, your best case scenario in your view as to who we might have some evidence for having.
Well, I actually really appreciated in Sean's book. He breaks down at the end of each chapter. He talks about he gives a rating about whether these people were probably out preaching, and a rating as to whether or not they specifically died in the manner that is commonly held. And most of them he lumps into a category called as plausible as not. And most of those I would consider, I just lower that down to like, these likely didn't happen. If a lot of the sources, for example, on Thomas, if you want to accept the Acts of Thomas, which is one of the main sources for that, then you also have to accept that Thomas was like Jesus's twin brother. Like, there's weird things in all these.
I had to point out the Gnostic Gospels, of course, were written much later than the Gospels that were accepted by the early church fathers. And so to bring in Thomas or the one according to Peter or any of those kind of things, that's not really fair, because a lot of them came about after the year 150, well after anyone was even living.
Yeah, well, was Thomas even ever in consideration to be part of the canon? I know Peter was.
I haven't seen Thomas being in consideration. I could be wrong, but I have seen like what Justin Martyr said, and the people who've attributed the Gospels to and actually created part of the canon in that 1st and 2nd century, the early church fathers.
But so what was he actually claiming about that then you have to consider? Was he saying that according to the Gospel of Thomas, he was a twin brother? Because that's kind of moving the ball in a way that Paul usually doesn't do. Because that's not a source that the Christians think is a valid source. So that could have been written at any time for any motivation, right?
I know, to bring that up though, it's strange, because Paul usually goes for 1st century stuff, and now he's bringing in something that was written much later.
Well, normally he doesn't bring in like there are some people like who when they're doing this type of stuff who will go outside of he usually sticks to what's considered scholarship, right? As far as I'm understanding this debate, the reason why Sean McDowell answered his video is that he has respect for Paul, and he thought that Paul's bringing a lot of integrity and asking legitimate questions based on scholarship, correct?
Yeah. Well, I did like the fact that, I got to give Paul credit for reading Sean's book. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people might not have done that. They might have just gone in there and figured, maybe read a part or read somebody's commentary on it, but he actually went chapter by chapter, and it sounds like he read the whole book.
Right. And then he did a video on it. And then I'm pretty sure Sean answered his video. I think that's how this all got started, because he did a video on Paulogia's. Paulogia did a video on his book, and then he answered him in a video. So that's how this all got started.
Susan's saying the Gospel of Thomas was never in consideration. So I am watching the chat, guys.
So it doesn't really count as evidence for anything, is my point.
Exactly. That's the thing.
It doesn't matter if it says that what's being said there, because I don't think, as far as I know, there's no like some of this stuff, like Peter was definitely part of the canon at one point. So, but as far as I know, Thomas, there's no legitimate scholar who says that Thomas has any correspondence to any historical veracity at all, right?
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm just guessing.
No, Susan, I'll go with Susan on this, because she probably has looked into it, or she wouldn't make such an assertion here. So I hadn't looked into it, but I have looked into the forming of the canon. I didn't focus on Thomas at all, but I looked into the forming of the canon and which books were listed under which people. And like, for example, we have Justin Martyr very early on, around 150 or so, listing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for example, plus a number of other Gospels. And so, a number of other books. So
you've looked into it a little. What do you know about like the Maccabees and all the books that were in the Catholic Bible that have been left out?
Yeah, I looked into that. One of the reasons why the Protestants decided to leave out those books that are in, and I actually read some of those books, like Baruch. They're really good. Enoch, those are good books, super interesting books. But the reason why the Protestants pulled them, and the Catholics always had them in the canon, is because the Jewish people didn't have them in their canon. They took it out. I don't know if they had them originally or they took them out, but the Protestants decided they were going to go with the Jews' compilation of the Old Testament. So they eliminated those books.
I got you.
So that's kind of interesting. But the books are super interesting to read. One of them, The Wisdom of Sirach, is kind of similar to Psalms. It's very, very interesting. So
Wow,
I'd
that's
actually
cool.
recommend reading them, even though they're not in the canon. So
Yeah,
here we go.
Cases. So I'm with Sean. I just lower everything. So when he says as plausible as not, I say not plausible. He has as probable as not. Those are the ones where I kind of look at it, but to me, those feel more like traditions. The ones where and of course, we both agree that John, and there are several Johns, but the John who is said to have written the book, the Gospel of John, he said to have lived as an old age, so no martyrdom for him. I think we agree on that. And then he has a category of people that he puts into highest probable, if I'm remembering correctly, highest possible probability. And those are James, the brother of Jesus. Oh no, he's in very plausible. It's James, the son of Alphaeus, right? You have the highest possible, Paul, highest possible, and Peter's highest possible.
We actually don't have good information about James, the son of Alphaeus. I looked into that one. We do have James, the brother of, son of Zebedee and brother of John. That's the James that was martyred in Acts, not Alphaeus. That's the one mistake that Paul made here. That I didn't think he made many mistakes, but I did notice that was one sort of factual error that was in this. So, because it's documented in Acts that it was under Herod that James, who was the brother of Zebedee, was done.
Didn't you debate Paul?
I actually agree.
I debated, you know what I debated him on? I listed what I called 8 minimal facts or something like that. I had some facts that I put out there. He didn't like my word of facts, so I debated him on each one of them we had to go through. And I made some, what's it called? Concessions. I made some concessions with that, but I still believe that we have a lot of pretty good information. Like he'll say, Gary Habermas basically will say the vast majority, up to 90 to 95% of scholars agree to these basic minimal facts, like Jesus existed, obviously. Jesus died. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. His disciples were
that's what the minimal facts argument is that most people will readily say. So that's similar to a lot of this. Okay, I never looked into that. The Gary Habermas argument.
What Gary Habermas did is, this is for his dissertation. So he was putting together a dissertation, and he was going to basically show that Jesus resurrected. And so he went to his dissertation chair and advisory committee, and they basically told him, don't use the Bible to prove this. You have to go outside of the Bible. And so what he did is he went to extra biblical sources and pieced together what he called the minimal facts, what he could find outside of the Bible, and even from hostile sources, not just church fathers. So he went to these hostile sources and he pieced, like, Jesus was crucified. His disciples said that they saw the risen Christ, and they preached for him despite being persecuted. So you've got a lot of information coming from hostile people like Josephus.
Now, do atheists generally agree with his minimal facts? Do they accept those minimal facts?
That was the point. They accept it, no matter, because they kind of have to. It's reported in these extra biblical hostile sources. So when you take together what we have from the extra biblical hostile sources, you put it together and you say, what's the best explanation? All of those different explanations, like the apostles hid the body, or Jesus wasn't really in an empty tomb, and that kind of stuff, that all goes away.
Right, but the thing that I was trying to point out goes back to your logic and ethos. Like, we can work with whatever the most skeptical atheist who's reasonable, the sane atheist, like Paulogia, is willing to give as the minimal facts, and then take from there and build the ethos, the emotional case based on the logical predicate. Because whatever they've been given it, whatever they're willing to see, that's the evidence that I'm willing to say actually exists. Those are facts. That's at least some evidence, right? It's not going to convince them of. Then you'd have to start working at other things. Like, most atheists don't believe that miracles are possible at all, right?
Right. Yeah, because they realize that would be an act of God.
Right. So then you could start looking at evidence that's, more readily available in the here and now, that they would probably agree is evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember Paul was asking about that at one point, but I never got back to him because I didn't have any good answer. But like after death experience and near death, I think some of that is real evidence. I've never looked into it, but my understanding is, like, there are some real evidentiary things out there for stuff that would qualify as supernatural.
Mm-hmm. I
Right?
agree. There's a big study, and I used to tweet it out. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and find it, but it was on a compilation of a whole bunch of near-death experiences. And it was interesting because they looked at all the reports and they found that it's actually a really small percentage of people claim they saw heaven or they saw God or something like that, or lights.
Most of them saw hell. Sorry.
Yes.
You're done.
Where they all, yeah, it's like pretty bad. Okay, here we go. Let's go.
That we have good sources because I think they come from outside the Bible for Paul and for...
See, he says good sources have to come from outside the Bible because I think he thinks that the Bible authors had some sort of bias, but we have to remember that...
They think that the Bible... I mean, I get that. The Bible has an agenda and the Bible has a point of view about these topics. So they're looking for, a non-biased source. That's why it's really hard to do this with the Bible because, it's so long ago. But when you bring it closer to home, there's some of these things like martyrdom in the 40s for Corrie ten Boom. There's no one who will deny the facts. You know what I mean? The facts are obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Peter, that they were probably both killed under Nero. We don't know if the fire was really set and what all the circumstances were there, but under Nero, those two probably were put to death. And then James's brother. The brother Jesus comes from Acts, which he accepts Simon, son of Zebedee because it comes from Acts, which I reject, but I'm still willing to give it some high clearance. So that kind of lays out, I guess I'm with Sean on all his assessments.
Except you just grade them
I lower them all down.
Right. Okay.
And then when it comes to the ones that are really strong, when it comes to Peter and with Paul, my contest is that those were not necessarily, situations where they were killed. Let me back this up. I actually believe that both Peter and Paul were very sincere. Those are the two that I actually accept. So I'm with him on the evidence. I would actually stand side by side with him to say those two existed. Those two died believing what they were saying. Mm-hmm. Sean, let me throw to you. I said a lot of words and I'm not sure it made a lot of sense.
No, that's fine. But I think you've laid it out pretty clearly that you've helped to kind of give the gradations.
And hopefully I didn't make any mistakes in there because that's from memory.
Well, let's ask Sean himself.
First off, thank you for reading the book and for being careful trying to get the assessments right. You did a good job. Let me just clarify a couple. I would say of the 12, meaning the original apostles, I would say Peter and then James, the son of Zebedee. We have high or very high probability they died historically speaking. In the group that I studied, but outside the 12, I would include James, not the son of Alphaeus, but James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul in the highest level of probability. Now, on some level, more probable than not, I might put Andrew and Thomas, and the rest are just, I think, inconclusive. So whether that's less than half, it really doesn't matter for my case. I don't think we can historically assess those traditions with any degree of confidence. But I'm not willing to concede that only Peter and Paul have a sincerity that can be established here. That's not something I'm willing to concede. But I do stop and I say it is very interesting that arguably the two most important founders after Jesus of the Christian faith, Paul, who wrote 13 letters, fine, you concede 7. Peter, who is mentioned more than any other apostle in all of the traditions, in Scripture and out of Scripture, you can see they believed Jesus rose from the grave, were willing to suffer and die for that belief that Jesus had risen. Even if I concede the rest that I don't, that's pretty powerful. That two of the most, I would say, figures are willing.
Yeah.
That's extraordinarily powerful. See, I would cede the rest. I mean, he won't. That's fine. That's his prerogative.
That's 6. So
yeah, but I would take
people.
Those two. But he just said, like, Apostle Paul wrote uncontested, what, 7 epistles?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
13.
Peter is the rock upon whom the church is built. Upon this rock I build my church. So Paul's willing to say that at least those two people, believed in the resurrection of Jesus Christ to the point where they were willing to die rather than deny. So those are two of the most important people in the foundation of the church. So I would just work on those as the strongest possible evidentiary tie for the case that we're trying to make and forget about the ones that Paul would dispute. I would stick with the stronger evidence, because those are the beating heart of the church right there.
They are, but actually I have to say, I'm still bothered by this idea of James, the brother of Jesus, because Josephus specifically mentioned his death, number one. Number two, we know that he was the leader in the Jerusalem church, and Josephus also noted that. And Josephus lived in Jerusalem at the time. He had direct access to James. And so I think that has to be, I mean, that's a really strong one.
Think
and
Paul
James
is
wrote,
nitpicking on that, or what?
I don't get why he won't give James credit. And I get the James, the brother of Zebedee, he didn't write anything. And the other one, Andrew and Thomas that he mentioned, they didn't write anything. But so we don't have as much stuff from them. But I still feel that you have to give James, Peter, and Paul. I think the three of them need the credit.
Right. So how much evidence do you think for a skeptic like Paul? Does Paul believe in miracles at all? That would be a question. I'm guessing he would say no. I've heard Matt Dillahunty say things along the lines of maybe. Like they did a stream 2 weeks ago where he said stuff like there are such a thing as a spontaneous remission, offering that there are inexplicable things that do happen medically, which they got to give. I mean, that's true. So, I mean, you could just based on what Paul is willing to give you, you could make a really strong case. That's the only thing I'm trying to say. Just
that would be interesting to do, Craig. Wouldn't it be interesting for you and I to make a really good case? You and I can make a really good case on that.
We could try for sure.
Yeah.
Hold on, that's my wife. I gotta get this. Hold on.
Hello, no one is available to take your call.
You've got an answering machine. Okay, here we go.
To go to the grave because they really believe Jesus had a.
But that's actually the heart of my naturalistic explanation for this whole thing, is that we have two people who, for whatever reason, came to believe this, and deciding that Peter early on and Paul later on, after he was persecuting people and probably felt really guilty about that. And Paul very much describes what he saw as a vision.
No, he actually didn't describe it just as a vision. He talked about the bodily resurrection of Jesus in the book of 1 Corinthians.
And depending on whether the Acts accounts or people saw things or didn't see things, in my hypothesis, what it came down to is we really can be confident about two guys. They're the ones who are prominent. And if they were sincere, which I've now come to believe those two were probably sincere, then we don't really have to go into crazy explanations about group hallucinations or group appearances and all those kind of things. Those don't have to come into play anymore. We just
note that group hallucinations are just as impossible as group dreams, because hallucinations by definition are internal. So you can't share a dream and you can't share a hallucination.
Have to explain how two people came to sincerely believe something.
Okay, so your naturalistic hypothesis, we should come back on some time and discuss your legendary hypothesis. I watched your video. I thought it was interesting.
Okay.
So minimally, I'm saying, fine, we have two people who really believe they saw Jesus. Two of the key spokespeople for the Christian faith who proclaim, teach theology, write books in the scripture. That's pretty significant as it is. One that traveled with Jesus during his life, part of the 12, one that was outside the 12, who was persecuting. So they're coming from two different places. Both think this is so true. They lay their lives on the line and are not lying about it. So that's significant. But the other thing I would say is we see right away that this message that Jesus is God and Caesar is not the kind of message that would easily be believed by people in this Jewish culture who had every reason to resist it. Not every reason, that's probably no meant. Believing it would put them at odds with not only the Roman culture, but put them at odds with, say, men of religion at the time. It's almost like if you need to explain Peter and Paul, everybody else falls in line. And I'm saying no chance. There's no chance. 60 years later, and I can document this, there would have been 1,100 eyewitnesses of the ministry of Jesus left. Within 30 years, there would be over 20,000 eyewitnesses to the life, ministry, or death of Jesus left. People could investigate this. So to explain away the beginning of the church, you've still got the writings of John, You've still got the writings of James. You've still got so many other testimonies here that even conceding Peter and Paul wouldn't give us close to explaining the origin and explosion of this church.
A few things.
Are you there, Craig? I think that was brilliant. I don't know if Craig's back yet.
Yeah, I only caught the tail end of it. So
yeah, he
saying
pointed
that
out that the Jewish people had every reason not to believe, because they weren't, there was no cash incentive to believe. There's no materialistic benefit if you believe. In fact, you're going to be maybe jailed. And he also made a really good distinction between Peter and Paul that we haven't really talked about. This idea with Paul, a lot of people would say, oh, well, Peter was just, they got so excited with Jesus that they decided they're going to carry on the tradition. But the fact that Paul, who is hostile and persecuting Christians, suddenly came to believe is pretty much needs to be pointed out to people.
Right. He did a complete 360. And I mean, everybody knows this, but what do they attribute it to?
Yeah, well, that's the thing where people get a little bit, they ignore what Paul's saying himself throughout the epistles and his experiences and how much he had been beaten and, he'd shipwrecked, snake bites. He ends up being martyred. He's jailed a couple of times. He's stoned. He's whipped. All these things happen to Paul, and he keeps persisting over decades. And people would say, well, what motivated him? And these guys will say, oh, he must have felt guilty on the road to Damascus. Really?
Guilty.
Because he just got all the documentation he needed to go and kill more people. He was breathing terrible words, it says in the book of Acts. And suddenly he has this experience that blinds him for a few days. So I think you got to give credit where credit's due. There's another thing that Paul says in one of the books, and I'm trying to remember which one. I think it's Galatians. Paul made a mention that the writing wasn't coming from him. The writing was coming directly from Jesus. So the book is not just...
He says that a couple of times. First in Galatians 1, I'm pretty sure he says that.
Yeah.
Where he wasn't being mentored by a person. He was being mentored directly by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And I think you got to give him, he said that. You have to take that pretty seriously in saying that people are just crafting a story. If you feel like God is speaking to you, what motivation would you have to possibly craft some sort of a tale together? You know what I'm saying? Like Paul didn't have the motivation to make anything up. First, he's hostile towards him, and he had to completely change his life. He had a good life before as a Jewish person in some sort of prestige in the synagogue, and suddenly now he's looked down upon by the Pharisees, who even took a pledge to kill him. They're going to fast for 40 days.
So how do people? I don't think that a skeptical person is even digging into the Pauline epistles enough to even be thinking this is what he's testifying to, right?
Yeah.
Paulogia, sure, because he was raised Christian, so he would be, but most of these other people aren't actually reading what Paul said and thinking that, or aren't even really trying to. They're not really looking at it at all, as far as I can tell. Paulogia is, it's more along the lines of looking for it to make like debunks that are probably real as far as he's concerned, right? But your average skeptic who doesn't believe in God, are they even reading Galatians? Are they even reading the Bible? Are they looking at Paul's testimony at all? I doubt it, right?
I doubt it, because I think if you look at Paul's testimony, actually, that's one of the reasons I didn't really... Before I came back to Christianity, I hadn't really read the Bible through that well. I'd only known the Gospels, really, and the Catholic Church it's not the same as the Baptist church I'm at now, where we really dig into every gospel. We really dig into lots of parts of the Bible, including the Old Testament.
Catholic Church used to discourage that. There's the catechism, and the priest does the reading and the priests interpret, and they actually discourage the lay people from even reading the Bible on their own, because you might get other ideas about what God is saying.
Well,
so
some of their teachings actually go against what's written in the Bible. So that's the thing. You're not supposed to confess to. There's not supposed to be an intercessory person between you and God when you're confessing. You're supposed to repent to God. But in the church, you have to repent to the Father. And even calling himself the Father in church. Father McGinn was one of my fathers or priests, and you're actually not supposed to refer yourself in that sense, because there is one Father. So it actually says that. So I read that and I thought, wait a second, that goes against what I learned when I was little. But
but they're also trying to discourage you, the individual Christian, from reading the Bible and coming to your own conclusions about what it says and what it doesn't say.
And they did a fine job, because I didn't.
Right. Well, innovation of Protestantism is welcome.
Well, that's why I hadn't even known about Paul. And when I first heard about Paul and started looking into that whole story, I was blown away. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy was totally against the church, had no motivations to suddenly convert. In fact, it cost him his life. And so,
right. But I doubt any skeptical person is even going to be taking up step one in terms of that, like reading. I doubt it. I don't know. Maybe they do, but I don't know.
Well, I see some skeptical people in the audience now. In fact, I don't see any Christians in this whole group here that are watching it right now. So thank you guys for paying attention. I guess we should let Paul Ogia say what he wants to say on this. Should we go to that? I've got Iron Charioteer, somebody with a lot of letters in the name, SD4, Iron. Oh, there's Iron Stripper Liquor.
Stripper Liquor. Is that like Stupid Or Energy's best friend or something?
Here we go.
I actually want to step back and just let everyone sink in that I think you would agree that evangelicals, it's probably a bad thing to do to overstate all those cases that you gave on the band, right? Like it creates people like me when you set an expectation that we know the grisly deaths and that, and that we can hang our hat on those. That's probably not something Christians should do.
No, I've never done that.
Yeah, I know you haven't, but people in my life have.
Christians should do that.
Yeah,
100%. That's agreement with us.
We do have evidence. I just want to point something out that Stripper Liquor is saying here in the audience. She said, "Wait, did someone say first century Christians were jailed for simply believing? History, nor scripture indicate this in the way that the statement foundationally indicates." Well, actually, yes. Take a look at Tacitus and what he said. Tacitus made it very clear what happened, and that was in the first century. So take a look at that. And actually, if you want to go to the second century and give us a little credit on that, we could look at what Pliny the Younger said in his letter to Trajan. So I just want to point that out. Sorry about that. Here we go.
Yes.
So I didn't want to let that slide by without, sort of getting that on thought, on record. I guess where you and I differ is in terms of the plausibility of whether a legend can grow. I mean, all the time we see, religion after religion you presumably don't think are true. They grow, even though they're not based on facts and they're based on things that theoretically could be checked. This whole, like the 500, some of whom are probably still alive, and I don't know if that was written in the 30s or the 50s, that particular fragment of the sentence. I still don't understand how someone's supposed to go to Jerusalem and say, go check out that there's 500 unnamed people who witnessed the thing 20 years ago. Like if I said that 20 years ago here in Calgary, that there was a concert out in the woods and 500 people saw it. So come to Calgary with roughly the same size as Jerusalem, and verify that. Well, how do you do that? How do you go door to door and like find one of these 500 people? And not only that, we also know from Woodstock and other events that you start talking about people start to think they were there. So you probably could find, a handful of people. So I guess I'm just not as skeptical as you that this stuff can grow.
Let me jump on the 500 here, okay? And in some ways,
what argument is?
Right.
I think it's actually
he's trying to, in the account in 1 Corinthians where it says that there are 500 people who are also witnesses. Sean pointed out that the 500 your phone's kind of clicking a little bit, but Sean pointed out that the 500 would basically be supported because some of them were alive and they could go discount what Paul said. But Paul is saying, well, yes, the 500 people were alive, but which 500 is essentially what he's saying, and how would you find them? And how would we go to door? He's basically saying to find the 500 to say, are you going to discount what's written here? So because Paul didn't name the 500, it makes it a challenge to say which people.
So he's saying they can't be verified, or
that's what he's saying. He's saying it wouldn't be able to be verified because it could be
he acknowledges that there were 500, that Paul's claim is true on its face, like there are 500 people who bore witness to the resurrection, right?
I don't think this Paul is giving credit for that. I think he's saying that Paul the disciple just made that up essentially. And
he's saying he just said, so there's no 500 people.
There's no way to, he's saying he just put in there 500 possibly to build a case to establish credibility for 1 Corinthians 15. So Paul is kind of alluding to that. I don't know if he's saying that directly, but he's alluding to Paul, the author, basically just.
And then what's this got to do with Woodstock?
500. Well, because he's saying that at an event, 500, he's saying, then he goes into this idea that people have false memories, and there is something called false memory syndrome, and it does happen. So he's saying people have these false memories that, oh yeah, I was there, I watched Jesus. He's saying that people said the same thing about Woodstock. Oh yeah, I was at Woodstock. I mean, people at Woodstock were so high, how'd they even know they were there?
Right, exactly. Just a interesting aside, because I used to hang out with a lot of deadheads up in college. Like Albany is hippie central because it's close to Woodstock, the original Woodstock. I've been there. I've been to like Yazir's Farm. So there's a lot of hippies up in upstate New York, a lot of like transplants from New York City. And they used to, there's a contingency of hippies who ascribed miracle working powers to Jerry Garcia. Like I remember this one guy telling this story to me, and it's like, and I was at this show, man. And they were doing this song, when push came to shove, you're afraid of love. And right at that time, the clouds separated. And like there were literally who believed that the Grateful Dead had some control over the weather, and that they had some miracle working powers. But that also tells you, because like it'd be worth investigating how much, because people say like, that's the origin of the Jesus story, that they ascribe to him miracles. But in order for a legend to grow that much in that short a period of time, you know what I'm saying? There's so much more, even if you aren't granting that the miracles happened, there's so much more like real in terms of how many people actually would have been needed to attest to them for there to be, like with Jerry Garcia, there's Elvis sightings. Everyone's aware of the fact that there are Elvis sightings to this day. But in order for there to be like a lot to the point where you could make a gospel according to Elvis, there would have to be hundreds of like thousands. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you can't just build it off of, some random guy named Frank who saw something.
Well, because there was like, for example, with Jerry Garcia, there is a contingency of hippies who think he has miracle working powers. And they'll tell you.
Those people who follow the dead, I was in the same college. I was in college the same time as you. Those people who followed the dead were usually completely drugged out. I mean, that's what the dead did. People went and followed them and they got totally high on drugs. They probably they were probably doing hallucinations, doing acid, everything else. So
of course.
No wonder they saw something. They're hallucinating on their acid.
Right. But the only thing I'm trying to point out is that the real world parallel where people are reporting this legendary figure has miracle working powers. It's in order to get to the point where you could write a gospel of it. You can't even get close with an actual. No, that's with actual point. Legendary figures. The parallels just aren't even close. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I want to point out, I'm looking at the chat, by the way. Hi, everybody in the chat. Thank you. And I see John Lloyd and Susan are still in the chat. They're pointing out a bunch of other great people in there. But I want to say Stupid Horror Energy says Tacitus said the Christians were killed because they were blamed for a fire, not because of what they believe. Well, of course, it's because they were Christians. So the Christians could have said, hey, I'm a pagan. You can't just, why are you arresting me? Right?
She's here right now?
Yeah, she's in the crowd too.
Yay. Is she going to go out with Deacon, not Deacon Verman?
Yeah, Stupid Horror Energy. G-Man was,
he asked you out.
Did you so about a candlelit dinner.
Yeah. What was the take on that? Are you guys going to date?
So we'll wait to see what she says.
She said she's probably going to say no.
So, okay, here we go.
Pretty easy to go find the 500. I just did an interview on my, I did an interview online, and I was interviewing the father of Timothy McVeigh, who was the Oklahoma City bombing, and the father of one of the victims. And because of their Christian faith, a reconciliation that they had together. Well, Timothy McVeigh's father lived in New York, and Bud Welch lived in Oklahoma. So he's like, how do I find this person? Well, he basically gets in touch with a nun in New York who knows a person who knows a person, and very quickly they're in contact with each other. It's actually not that hard if there's 500 people to ask around, to do research, to do investigation. And the way it's written in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says this in such an early time span in a public forum, saying, if you don't believe me, go check it out. So my only point is, my case doesn't rest on the 500. I don't think I mentioned it once in my entire book, apart from the quote in 1 Corinthians. and this is where we differ. I think you're taking a hyper skeptical approach to this, and you might think I have a hyper trusting approach to this. That's fine. Methodology really makes a difference here. And this came clear to me. I watched the debate that you had, and I thought this was interesting, where, let me see if I read it correctly. This is a debate on the resurrection on your website. And let me see if I find here. You said, what would convince me? Quote, the requirement of evidence is so high. If I saw an appearance of Jesus, I would first question my mental faculties. I would question whether this vision was really real. And I read that. I thought, okay, he is coming from a hyper skeptical position, and you're free to do that. But that's not how scholarship operates. That's not how a lot of New Testament scholarship operates. When we look at who the apostles are, how we know they're willing to suffer, their willingness to die. Now, on the flip side, I think, as you point out, you and I have this in common. I think there's also been a hyper trust by many Christians who read martyrs and says, hey, they all died as martyrs, and they proclaim it. Well, I've made that claim in the past, so I repent on this show from making that before I did my research. That should be corrected as well. So I'm kind of standing in the middle saying Christians who've overstated things, you need to ratchet it back and be faithful to the evidence. But I also think there's reason to have this hyper skeptical position and reject that are early and consistent and by the vast majority of scholars. That's where my pushback would be.
I want to say, one thing I like about Sean McDowell is he doesn't lean too far to the left or too far to the right, if you know what I mean. Like, he's not, there are people on the Christian spectrum who, it sounds like a different kind of spectrum, but the Christian spectrum, you've got the people who are super liberal. Like, I would put Laura Robinson in that pot. I'd even say Mike Licona is very liberal. And then there's the other ones who are really conservative. And the idea of, I don't know who I would name in that, maybe John MacArthur, pretty conservative, and others. Right. And then a lot of times the really conservative one also tend to be young earth creationists. And then I think right. Sean's in the middle, because Sean, and I like that. That's where I feel like I am, because I don't want to go too far one way and too far the other way. I feel like there's this middle ground where you can say, well, I want to be skeptical. I want to know the truth. And I don't want to be that person who says that, such and so was martyred, and then I have no corroborating evidence. I looked up what we had for James, the son of Alphaeus, being martyred, and I couldn't find anything that was really that good.
Right. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with you that there's a middle ground where, well, what I'm trying to always parse out, and did you hear Laura Robinson when the second time she was on Pine Creek Doug? Because it was actually good. She started talking about some of her spiritual experiences. Then he started acting towards her the way he acts towards every Christian, including me, where he's like, running his Pine Creek Doug playbook. I'm going to post a video about it soon.
Yeah,
because
I did hear that.
Because I'm not really there's definitely a middle ground where it can be discussed, what available evidence there is. And then there's knowable facts that pretty much any reasonable person can come to. And yeah, some people lean heavily on the liberal side. Some people lean too heavily on the conservative side. I definitely agree with that. And then there's a middle ground where all the reasonable people will agree that these are pretty much the knowable facts about the situation, right? That's so I definitely think that.
Because I think you want to have the truth. Like, I don't want to overstate anything. I really want to find the truth. And I think that that's all we need. Jesus gave us enough information with just what he gave us. We don't have to make things up or add things to or do anything like that. We just take the information for what we can get.
Right. Yeah, totally. And there are some of these things like, there are known facts about the Bible that basically it's up to the academics to piece together. These are the known facts. And then what they mean in terms of our faith, that's up for us to kind of demonstrate after the facts have been established. Is that a good way of saying it, maybe?
Yeah. I want to mention one other thing about Sean McDowell is, as I said, I have this book from Josh and Sean McDowell, and his dad's been a Christian, and he originally wrote this Evidence That Demands a Verdict in the early 1970s. And he also wrote another book on Daniel in the lion's den. basically. And it's actually interesting because he takes my perspective that Daniel was written when the author of Daniel said it was written, which is essentially in the 6th century BC. And so that view to me is consistent with what the information we're provided is. And Sentinel Apologetics will back me up because he's been looking at that a lot. And I'm sure Sean would too. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because when Sean came into the picture and wrote this book, I looked at the level of quality of Josh's original 1970s book versus this evidence that demands a verdict. And you can see that he just took this up to this academic, really high level notch. And I think that's great. So he's been a great addition to the McDowell family.
Well, the other thing I was going to say along these lines is with, for example, Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman definitely has a bias against the supernatural, and it actually affects his scholarship. Like, it's one thing to be completely skeptical, but like his book on Jesus becoming God through the Gospels, like there are parts of like, even as a layperson, that I know that Jesus said in like the book of Luke that shows that he had a view of himself that lines up with the supernatural view. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, he does all through the Gospels. Even look at Mark 14:62. Bart's argument starts with Mark being the first gospel and everything else embellished on it. But sorry, Mark 14:62 makes it quite clear that Jesus knew exactly who he was.
Right. And well, and also like the book of Matthew, where he comes down and starts saying, like, you have heard it said of old, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I say to you. So he's casting himself in a role that's pretty obviously like, you know, the fulfillment of the scriptures. Whether it's fully fleshed out in the book of John theologically is a different story. He's right about that. But he casts himself in a role that's pretty specific, even in the other gospels. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. He's going around, besides the fact that, Bart will discount the fact that he was doing miracles, but besides that, he's going around forgiving people for sins committed against other people.
Right. So he's,
like, who does
he's
that?
Right. He's already casting himself in a role just because it takes the book of John where he goes, before Abraham and Isaac, you know, or before, before Moses, I am. He spells it out specifically. He's casting himself in like the book of Luke, you know, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing.
Yeah.
Pretty specifically referring to himself as you know, the fulfillment of the scriptures. Now you can not believe that, but it kind of clouds his scholarship in terms of it's there. You know, he's saying it about himself, and is pretty sure that those aren't the scriptures that are in dispute as to whether Jesus said it or not. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but.
Well, I want to piggyback on that, because one of the things that he does that's you have to really look at. Some people say, well, Jesus, at this point, he didn't refer to himself as the Son of God, or at this point, he deferred to the Father. But you have to remember something really important here. Jesus did not present himself as the Paschal Lamb, okay, until Nisan 10, just 4 days before he was crucified. Because the date in Daniel, basically, if you look at the book of Daniel, you look at Daniel 9, then you look at Nehemiah and Ezra, we're going to get to the date that's on the Monday of the Passion Week. If you look at all these dates and put it all together and look at the prophecy from Daniel 9, you're going to see that lands us on Nisan 10, when Jesus presented himself. So throughout his ministry, a lot of times he's not saying to the crowds, he's speaking in parables, but he's not saying to the crowds, hey, I'm the Savior, I'm your Savior. He's not doing that kind of stuff, because he wasn't supposed to come out officially until Nisan 10. And the interesting thing is that this aligns right with Exodus, because in Exodus, they selected the lamb on Nisan 10, and they slaughtered the lamb on Nisan 14. So Jesus is in complete alignment with Exodus.
Interesting.
So that's
interesting.
I had a question here from Stripper Liquor.
Stripper. Is he related to like
Stripper Liquor? I'm trying to see.
Do you
this
guys
question.
know each other? Stupid Whore Energy and Stripper Liquor. You guys like partners or something?
You guys pals? Says people often, I haven't read this yet, but people often speak in a broad, exaggerating storytelling style when they lack personal experience in an area. As a bona fide deadhead back in the day, your characterization is folklore. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. She was a bona fide deadhead. I don't know if Stripper Liquor is a she or a he, but it looks like in the picture there's a she. A bona fide deadhead.
Wait,
I had friends who were bona fide deadheads, and I could tell you they were high the whole time. They told me.
I hung out with a bunch of deadheads. The story that I told was there was a chess player, Pete Gillette, actual human being. I played chess with him. He's like the third best chess player in New York State. And he, word for word, out of his mouth, I was at the show, man. He was just like hippie. He was a really fun guy. He used to hang out in our apartment all the time. I was at this show, man, and the clouds parted just when they were saying, when push comes to shove, you're afraid of love. And the rain stopped and the clouds parted. It was like, those were his exact words.
Oh,
So,
believe me, I've been some of my friends from Florida State. When I was in Florida State, they had these stories that you wouldn't believe, and a lot of them were having mushrooms and all kinds of different, acid. They were on anything that would make them hallucinate. So they're seeing all kinds of wacky stuff. I can honestly say I never tried that stuff because that scares me. That's seriously, I don't want to hallucinate. It just really freak me out. So, okay.
No comment.
Oh. Okay.
I think the one thing that I want to make clear is, though, like, I do accept some of the documents. I accept that Jesus existed. There's 7 letters of Paul that I feel are written by Paul.
I got to give him credit for that. He's not a Jesus mythicist, don't you think?
Yeah, totally. Well, that's what I mean. Paulogia is like skeptical enough that he could be our source for these type of arguments because he gives enough ground to the Christians that we can work with it, I think. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So stripper liquor is a man. So I'll have to refer to so stupid whore energy and stripper liquor, one's male, one's female. So
stupid whore energy is fun. Is she still here?
I don't know if she's still in there. Yeah, definitely. Stripper liquor says marijuana use was extremely prevalent. Nothing to do with hallucinations. No, I don't. Marijuana doesn't cause hallucinations sometimes?
No, not really.
Maybe not. Well, not like the other stuff, I guess. Okay, here we go.
And absolutely have to be reconciled. I am not in some fringe of weirdness that, is beyond this. But
is he claiming that Richard Carrier is in a fringe of weirdness?
Yeah, he was. He's implying it at least.
Internal turmoil. I'm gonna have to go talk to. I'm gonna have to send a little clip.
The schism has revealed itself. Atheist versus atheist.
Yes,
I love it.
The battle. I might have to. I might have to take a little clip out of this video and send it over to Godless Engineer.
Oh, slam.
So, because Godless Engineer is another one he's reading Richard Carrier's books and he's on that whole idea that Jesus didn't walk the earth, which I think is ludicrous when you look at what historians say. So, I mean, even if you're a Muslim, Muslims acknowledge he walked the earth. So do Hindus. So do people in these other faiths. So I don't think it's doing history any sort of favor by pretending something in history that's been well attested, more well attested than really any other person in history. You have to give credit where credit's due. So here we go.
Historical. But you are a cartoon character online. I mean, you got to admit
this is true.
That contributes a little bit to it. Come on, Paul.
A very muscly cartoon character.
Yeah,
I know.
That's a different story for another time. Yeah, I apologize for what you have to see today. That's not as cute as Sean. But when it comes down to it, like, what we can't get to historically, and this is just going to be philosophically different, is can you get to a miracle? Like you specifically, when you talk to me about being hyper skeptical, if I saw Jesus in front of me, like, that's either a miracle or I'm seeing something. Like, those are the two options. So it only makes sense to me. I can't imagine, Sean, if someone from your congregation came and said, I saw Jesus appeared to me last night, you would probably, at least in your head, say, well, perhaps this was something you imagined and perhaps it was real. You'd at least put both of those options on the table.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's hyper skeptical to at least want to go through the mental exercise of saying, did I have bad pizza? Are there factors? Am I overtired? Like, are there factors that may have contributed?
Okay. That's fair. And look, I'm actually naturally a skeptic. I question things. If someone comes to me and says, hey, I saw a miracle in Jesus, I'm like, yeah, give me some evidence. So I'm skeptical like that. But if I had multiple people that I knew came to me, and then I remember this said, oh, somebody predicted this on multiple occasions. And then I have all these different lines of evidence indicating Jesus appeared to somebody. And then somebody is challenged to this. They say, you know what? I'm going to preach this. And if it gets me thrown in jail, it gets me thrown in jail. I would say, gosh, that person really believes it. So your claim about history getting to a miracle, that's fine. We're not talking about whether history can study the miraculous. I don't think the deaths of the apostles get us to a miracle. I never say that in my book. All I'm saying is they sincerely believed Jesus appeared to them. In fact, I'm not sure what else they can do. You and I are both skeptics, Paul. People say stuff to us all the time, and I can tell we are both wired like skeptics. But to me, when somebody says, you know what, I'm willing to suffer for this, I'm willing to say this even though it costs me something, not because of something I personally gain. That's where I stop and I say, okay, you really believe this. Tell me about that.
I want to talk about that for a second, because imagine the early church of how difficult it would be to convince people who are skeptical. You're naturally skeptical and inclined not to believe that somebody rose from the dead. So I actually have to say that the role of the Holy Spirit in the early church can't be understated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that the Holy Spirit made it real to people, and that's why they started to believe en masse. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah. Well, and it says it even in Acts, they say, 3,000 more came to believe that day, or 4,000 more came to believe that day. And so I do think that God was working down there through all those people so that he opened their eyes. They didn't constantly have to be persecuted every single day to say, oh, well, Peter was persecuted today, therefore, I don't think that's what Sean's saying. He's saying he's willing to be persecuted, but that's going beyond the point. It's that God's opening people's eyes.
Right. Well, that's the part. That's why I brought up the Corrie ten Boom, because that's closer to home. Everybody understands that the person in question was willing to suffer and die rather than deny, rather than walk away from their faith, walk away from what they thought was how God really wanted them to act. I mean, that's compelling evidence of something, really strong conviction, at least. Now, everybody would at least acknowledge that that's evidence of really powerfully strong conviction. So all things being equal, the next question is, why would a person do that? And then you'd start going, is Corrie ten Boom crazy? And then you find out that it's actually inspiring and honorable. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So there's a way to make that case really, really strengthen that case and make it compelling. I don't know how compelling it gets to convince a skeptic, but there's definitely a way to punch up the emotional aspects of it.
The tough thing with the skeptic, here's a really tough thing. It's kind of like here's what Romans says is going to happen to the skeptic. So here's your average skeptic, and you say, well, I'm going to go ahead and Romans 1 says, number one, everyone has been given a general information to God's existence. So everybody knows deep down that God exists. However, some people will deny God exists. Then God is going to harden their heart and send a powerful delusion. So a lot of people are in the state right now where no matter what you say to them, they're not going to take it as evidence. No matter what, you could say that, like to Matt Dillahunty, when Mike Licona said, what if you saw, stars aligning in the sky that said, I am God and I am here? Matt's answer was not to acknowledge that that's God, but to say that he must be seeing things. So it's this hyper skeptic.
That was in their debate?
Yeah.
Did you watch the Tyler Vila, Matt Dillahunty debate?
No, I didn't even know about that one. Was that good?
Oh, it's great. You got to check it out. Matt Dillahunty, it wasn't as good. I kind of critiqued Tyler Vila, and he answered me in the comment section, because it was almost great. It was really strong up to a point, but he didn't quite get it over the finish line for that. His philosophical argument actually proved that God didn't exist. God does exist. But it threw Matt Dillahunty to the point where he went and checked with Alex Malpass. That's the tell. If you see a philosophical debate with Matt Dillahunty, and then a week later you see him streaming with Alex Malpass analyzing the debate, Alex Malpass is the go-to scholar that Matt Dillahunty will check his work with to go, did I miss something here? This was actually a strong argument. What did I miss? Do you know what I'm saying? Because Alex Malpass is the first-rate pointy head of their community, the real philosopher king of the atheists. So
him and Graham Oppie.
We could do that one if you want. We could analyze it. It'd be really interesting.
I'd do that. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, so I probably have to catch a little bit before so I know what I'm getting into, but I would definitely be willing to do that.
Yeah, either or. We can do the Brett Weinstein metaphorical truth debate. Anyone you want to do, I'll do. All of them will be good.
So Iron Charioteer, and this is a throw you for a little question here. Craig, apply the same logic about martyrs for Christianity to Muslims.
Yeah, but I did in the last stream. It goes like, it breaks down like this. Yeah, yes, a Muslim is willing to crash into a building to die for what he believes and doesn't prove anything about his belief. But first of all, that's very different than Corrie ten Boom. Go look at who I'm talking about. That's someone who was willing to go to a concentration camp, because God spoke to her, and said, you need to protect these Jewish people. First of all, it's honorable. In this case, it wasn't destructive. It was, I'm willing to sacrifice myself for what I believe over a long period of time and suffer. It's a totally different thing. I get that it doesn't prove that God's real, but in terms of a strong emotional case, it's totally different. It's not, if there were a Muslim who was willing to go to a poor neighborhood and, work 50 years in poverty in the name of Allah, I'd take that seriously. If I saw a Muslim doing that, I'd say that Muslim's onto something. There are Christians who are willing to do that. That's my point. It's different.
No, you explain that better, this idea of sacrifice. And the Muslim, in the case of the airplanes, when they crashed into the building, they knew they were harming other people. But Corey that you named, obviously knew that Corey's a she, right? Or he?
Yes.
She. Okay, Corey knew that she was not going to be harming anybody. She would be harmed. So.
Right. And it was also, it was love that the Bible tells you about, sacrificial love to the point where it costs you something. And I'm not saying that there's no logical case. I'm not saying it proves that there's a God and that the God that she serves exists. I'm just saying it's something to look into as compelling emotional evidence that this faith of Christianity was profoundly real to someone who is a truly honorable, decent human being. That can't be denied. I'm not saying it proves anything about, whether Jesus Christ is actually God or not. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that sounds pretty compelling, actually. All right, here we go.
And that's the consistent record we have of the apostles. So it doesn't prove it's true.
Well, it's the consistent record we have of two of the apostles, and that's where you and I.
The group of the apostles, the earliest record is he appeared to the apostles, and James and Peter and Paul are specifically mentioned in the very first document that we have.
We're going to have to go to our final break, gents. I'm really enjoying this conversation, though. Thanks for keeping it so spirited and lively, and such a good name.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom ahead, Craig. I don't know where he's.
Yeah, we're almost.
Did he do a break? Oh, he did. Oh, he did. He actually did a really short break. Okay, here we go. I thought he did one of those longer ones like the other one. His PhD, and questioned recently in a video by YouTuber Paulogia, who is Paul Enns, who joins us also on today's show. And just in that last section, again, Sean was saying, but look, it's remarkable, isn't it, that at least on two of these examples, you seem to be able to concede that they were sincere in their belief about having seen the risen Jesus, and that they were probably killed as a result of that belief, let's say, Paul. Now, in a way, that alone says you don't believe they were liars. You don't believe, and they didn't die for something they knew to be a lie. They sincerely did believe that this was the case. It seems to me, though, that your point as a skeptic is to say, well, but on the basis of two people having this belief that they were willing to die for, is that enough realistically to not posit a more likely thing that they, had some bad pizza or whatever the equivalent example is for them, that they just misinterpreted something. It's a pretty big mistake to make, obviously, if in the end it causes, it means you lose your life for the sake of it, that you happen to be wrong, that Jesus had actually resurrected. But you still think that's a more likely scenario ultimately than the miraculous one.
Yeah, and as Sean was talking about in the last segment, he went back to they were willing to suffer, all those kind of things. But if they weren't eyewitnesses, it doesn't matter. I think Sean would agree with me. For example, like the people who flew into planes on 9/11, they died for something that was a lie, but they didn't have opportunity to know whether it was a lie or not. So what we really care about is which people were in a position to know that whether or not what they believed to the point of suffering or to the point of death was a lie. And I guess that's, for me, where this whole argument fell apart and where it got narrowed down to these, really, there's only two guys that I think we can attest for that. But
I think that Sean made a really good case for why it should be considered all of the 12 and all of the other mentions in there. I don't think it's fair that he keeps reducing it down to like the Michael Jordan of the Bulls.
I'm okay with it, but I get why you think it's unfair. But
yeah,
you know,
I don't. But anyway, okay. So here we go.
I do want to, if I can, stray a little bit to another topic he touched on, and he actually quoted his friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case detective, and talked about how there are basically three reasons why someone commits a crime. That it's either sex, money, or power is the quote I believe that Sean used. And I guess for me, the fact that a fisherman from Galilee, after having had all these experiences, having crowds around him and all these kind of things, it feels like going back to fishing is not the best way to make money. And we can debate about whether or not the disciples actually ended up earning a living. It seems like Paul was at least earning somewhat of a living. But in terms of power, when I was in church ministry, when I was in youth ministry, I saw over and over, it only takes the smallest piece of power for people to lust after that power. So you put someone in charge of the bake sale table, that person is all in on the power of that bake.
I want to do a little comment on that because I just thought of something really funny. When I was living in Boca Raton, we lived across the way at one point from a bunch of condos, and we used to have a furniture business, and we used to sell furniture into these condos. And we always hear about the condo commandos, and like those are the people in life who maybe didn't have a managerial position or any sort of leadership position, and they go into the condos and they just start being like condo commandos. I mean, like Nazis, just being awful to everybody, and just I've got the rules now. So I can see what he's saying.
That's
right
the
here.
Middle manager at anybody here who's got a job. You're either a waiter or a full-time job. There's the middle manager, the petty tyrant. He's the guy who's not high up. He's not high enough to be the boss. He's like middle guy in the totem pole. And that it's by virtue of where they're at in their pecking order. So the only way that they can express their insecurity is by tyrannizing people down beneath them. So it's like a psychological. He's right about the person who, these are my cupcakes. You give them a little bit of power and it goes right to their head because they've never had any.
Yeah,
so,
there's definitely people like that. I mean, I can even think of the idea of if you're in these retirement 55 plus communities and they allow kids in there, they allow your grandkids to come and stay with you for maybe 2 weeks max per year. They'd be the people who would, the kids are there for 16 days and they're reporting you.
Right.
They're the busybodies who are.
They're the guy, the middle manager at your job. He's like, you show up 5 minutes late. He's the one who always notices and reports you to the boss and writes you up, and like, the school monitor, the hallway monitor at your school. You hand them a little bit of power and they become a Nazi.
Yeah, so I can see that. So I can admit that. Okay, here we go.
Table. You put someone in charge of, making sure where people are going to sleep. Well, they take that kingdom very strongly. It feels to me like these apostles, these disciples, got a taste of what it was like to be popular. I used to do worship leading for Promise Keepers, and I still remember the difference between doing Promise Keepers events for like a couple, few dozen people versus once I did it in a stadium with 12,000 people. I will always remember that because the power that, even though I had no power, I'm one of people on stage, whatever, I had no power, but I had a taste of what it was like. It sure makes sense to me that what the apostles may have been experiencing was some semblance of power, some semblance of matter. I have a tiny YouTube channel, medium-sized YouTube channel.
I'm glad he's saying this. He's got about 30,000 or even more. I haven't seen it lately or looked at his numbers. But
he's got a tiny YouTube channel. What do I have?
Yeah.
Not even a channel? I have like 300.
Yeah, look at my channel. My channel's got what? 1,200 people, 13. So he's got this channel with over 30,000 viewers. I don't know exactly what his numbers are. And he's got a lot of power based on that. And the whole thing's built off of his atheism. So he's got this, what they call escalation of commitment to be an atheist. And so if he decides one day he's not going to be an atheist anymore, he will essentially be losing his channel because his followers are following following him because they're atheists too, I would imagine, except for the exceptions like you. And I'm sure you're following him. So, but I'm just trying to say that it's kind of a scary thing because he's actually got some power himself as this voice in the atheist community that would commit him to atheism more so than, so it would give him motivation not to leave.
He could start doing what other atheists have started to do. They've started to like reconfigure their channels so they're more like, they're not quite atheist channels anymore. They're like SJW channels. They're like politic channels. They started going off into side ventures, and some of them don't make atheist content anymore.
Who is someone like that? Because I was thinking Skylar Fiction was going to go that way, but then it turned out he wasn't. Because all of a sudden he said he was wanting to do
Skylar
more.
Fiction we doubled back. He's got a little cottage industry of like doing his debates and his thing. I'm not sure if this is if I'm saying this, if I'm telling the truth, but I'm pretty sure Godless Iowan has stopped making atheist content of late.
Really?
I could be wrong. Yeah,
I haven't seen him in forever. I have not seen Godless Iowan.
Well, I'm pretty sure. I know he started becoming more about being like liberal and more about being, a friend of the trans community and stuff on Twitter. But I haven't watched his YouTube channel in a long time. But part of the reason I stopped watching it was because the atheist part of the content started to change. So I don't know for a fact that it's not an atheist channel anymore, but a lot of them morph over the years into so Paul could morph into a different thing. So Paul, if you want to get out of the atheist game, just throwing it out there if you're listening, just start making a channel about other things, and then
talk about politics or something interesting.
Yeah, you won't lose his subscriber base because he's good at doing YouTube. I mean, he's good at doing he's a good content creator in terms of talent and presentation, things like that. Better than I am, actually.
Oh yeah, he's totally better than I am. I can't do that. I don't have the editing software or skills yet. I need to get both.
I don't even know how to start. I've downloaded like edit videos and I can't make any sense of them. I can't figure out how to make any edits. The one thing that I had where it was like clips of like rock singers, and everyone was like, "What kind of stupid videos?" Was the only thing I could figure out how to make. Or it's like a slides of like of photographs. That's the only thing that I can figure out how to make. Other than that, I can't make sense of them at all.
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, I haven't. Yeah. Both you and I both have to work on that. So. All right, here we go.
Or get an intern. Find us an intern who will do it for us.
That's a good idea. And I could probably get one at my school.
That's why I said, yeah.
Oh, I have graduate assistant. Actually, maybe next semester.
Make it part of their grade point average. Like, come work for our YouTube channel.
Sometimes there's certain things that I can't mix my work and play on this kind of thing. That's the one thing. I don't want to do that because I don't have any idea what my graduate assistant's beliefs are, but I wouldn't want to force them to listen to my video.
Right. It'd just be funny to give them extra credit for like coming and making videos for us.
Yeah. If they want to do it, I'll pay you this amount of money outside of the school. So it wouldn't be the school relationship. So, okay, here we go.
Whatever it is I have, I still occasionally get this sense that, hey, there's a few thousand people listening to what I say, and that's enough. Like would I suffer and die for that? Not necessarily, but there is an element of motivation for these people that isn't purely that they necessarily believed it and that they didn't maybe want to buy in, like James.
That's a very interesting point, and one I hadn't particularly considered, but in a sense, the as you say, they went from relative obscurity to, at least within the Christian community, being very significant figures, and might that alone, I suppose the question is there, Sean, have been enough to have made them hang on to this belief even in the face of death, even if actually they weren't.
That's actually a really, like, I hadn't thought about that either, but that's a really good point, because even like, they might have even had some awareness that they were going to be part of the history of this new movement, So.
Yeah. So that is a point. There is some of that, but but even so, just doing it for decades is the one that really gets me. Doing this for decades, knowing that you're constantly at risk of being imprisoned. I mean, I can't even imagine how you'd live like that when you feel like tomorrow they could come and lock you up.
Right. So you're saying that the sacrifice is so great. They'd have to be totally insane.
I mean, they're constantly on the run. Paul was constantly on the run. He's never really sticking. I mean, he stuck around areas for small amounts of time, but he was constantly on the move, I should say, not on the run. But there's a lot of times when he had to actually be on the run because people were chasing after him. And so,
yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's just, I mean, just trying to visualize that. I can't even visualize that for a day living like that, let alone living decades like that. So, and he talked about Paul as what his occupation was. Paul was a tent maker. And so, but the fisherman occupation would be lucrative during those times. The fishermen actually were doing pretty well. People like to sort of disparage them, equating them with maybe a modern day fisherman living in some obscure little country, but it's not quite the same. It was a pretty good industry, pretty good pay.
Yeah, it was quite the racket back then.
Yeah.
That's like saying a computer programmer.
Exactly. I mean, it's a pretty good business. So the tax collector, look at he had a big house. So Matthew, the tax collector, had a big house because he threw a big, huge banquet for Jesus with a whole bunch of people. So his motivation wouldn't be to go abandon that and go traipsing around preaching and risking his life. So the motivations to stay in your business would actually be much higher in my view. So stay in your cozy home or your big house like Matthew had. So, or Luke was a doctor.
Or your big, huge YouTube channel. Your
Yeah,
30,000.
Yeah, Luke. Well, think about Luke as a doctor. So Luke also traveled with Paul starting in Acts 16. It's all documented. So here's a doctor who probably lived quite well too. So his whole motivation, why would he want to travel with Paul when Paul was constantly running from people who wanted to fast and kill him? So it's crazy. So thank you so much. John Lloyd is just saying thank you so much for today. So that's good. All right, here we go.
Yeah, I gotta wrap it up soon. What time
okay,
is
maybe we'll listen to like 2 more minutes and then we'll go.
Sure.
Okay.
I cite J. Warren Wallace, cold case detective, who's never lost a case. Every case he did, he says people are motivated by sex, lust, money, greed, or power. Those are the big three. And so we look at the disciples and we see no evidence that they're motivated by sex. Jesus treated women with nothing but charity and kindness. There's no evidence that they're motivated by power. So Paul just told a story about how people can be motivated by power. This was an assertion without any evidence that this is actually what motivated Peter and Paul, by the way, who had seen Jesus in the flesh, lay down his life, wash their feet, and live a life of self-sacrifice or money. So this story is honestly, it's an assertion.
But I would put this story on the same level of
now. Hold on,
let me level of your story about James, though. Like
let me finish.
Sorry,
you said in the church, people will have power because they tell bake table. Yeah, we tell somebody, hey, we're going to throw you to prison, and we're going to threaten you if you don't give up that bake table. Of course, they're going to give it up. That's totally different than the kind that we have with the apostles. And by the way, your YouTube channel has thousands of people. Your YouTube channel is bigger than the church was for decades. So this kind of power didn't exist until the movement had already started and the ball was well down the road. So that couldn't explain the beginning of their movement unless you're starting now and reading something back in that there's no evidence existed at that time.
And just,
I think that was pretty great. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, that was a pretty solid rebuttal, actually. I mean, I thought Paul's point was good. I guess if you put it in the context, what he was basically saying, you put it in the context of the times, it doesn't make any sense because they were very similar to what you were saying, but in the immediacy of the moment, because you put in the context of the time, these people were suffering. They were on the run. They weren't, if you told the person to give up the power of you give up that power of your bake table, or you're going to be martyred or go to prison, or that person would immediately give it up. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty solid rebuttal to what Paul was saying. I still think that he's got a kind of a good point in terms of not necessarily the ones that he found as possible psychological motivations, but the idea that there could be other psychological motivations that we're not considering other than, do you know what I'm saying? Like the idea that there could be motivating factors that come into play that we're not thinking about.
Yeah, the big argument is a distinction between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So we're saying they didn't have extrinsic motivators. I'm saying they definitely had intrinsic motivators because they had the motivation to get to heaven and be with Jesus. And if you fully believe in all of that, and you've got this intrinsic motivation to want to be right in Jesus's eyes, and Jesus called them. And so the motivation was to obey.
That's a no-brainer, and Paul would probably agree with that they at least believed enough in what they were preaching that they would think that the eternal rewards were coming, and they would think that they were being true to what they thought God was calling them to do. Paul would probably agree with all that. Paulogia,
yeah.
I would think.
Yeah,
right?
I would bet he would agree with that. See, I think that's a better argument than trying to make the bake sale power argument. Is just say, just to understand, take it for granted. Yes, they didn't have extrinsic motivators, but yes, they did have intrinsic motivators. And the intrinsic motivators definitely drove them. And so,
yeah, I agree.
Cool. Well, listen, Craig, how I know you said you have to go, and I got to get on a conference call myself. So how can people get a hold of you, or what are you actually, I've got you in the description so they can know how to get a hold of you. You can find him on Twitter at Craig Reed Holy. But what are you working on now, or where are you going to appear next? Besides Friday.
I think I'm gonna. We're doing a thing Friday with the two atheists, the Friendly Neighborhood Atheist and Pug. And then I'll be releasing a couple of videos this week. I might release a analysis of your powwow with Dr. Josh.
Cool.
Your combat. I think your SJ versus Dr. Josh.
He's going to be on my channel again on Thursday.
Yeah, what's going on with that? Are you talking about the same stuff, or?
Yes. What happened was one of my friends, Jesse Camping, wrote some questions, and we weren't able to get to all of them. So Josh said he'd be willing to come back to answer some of those questions and any other ones anyone has. So anything about the ancient Near East, you guys, if you have some questions.
Okay, so I definitely have some questions that I can ask.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I brought up in the video, I think I'll post the video today, is like on the Hammurabi Code. Do they have, like, that's a legal document that's somewhat similar to the Old Testament, but there's no like spiritual, there's no like real righteousness in the Hammurabi Code, is there? There's no like love your neighbor as yourself, any type of things like that. That's a good
question for him. Let's ask him that. Okay. I don't know much about the Hammurabi Code. I do know that one thing I have heard, though, that distinguishes it from Christianity is the idea of Christianity gives equal rights. It doesn't matter if you're a rich man or a poor man. If you murder somebody, you go to prison. But the Hammurabi Code, as Josh pointed out last time, has 3 distinctions for what level you are. So you have certain laws at each level. So the higher level, the less punishment for the crime.
Right. The question that I would have is like, there's stuff in the Hammurabi Code that Josh would be like, oh my God, this is because of the barbarism of the times, that are horrific. The question I would have, is there anything in the Hammurabi Code that Josh would be like, yes, this is actual true justice, or this is true righteousness, or this is, because I know there'd be some things in even the Old Testament that he would say that of. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like some ideas that he'd go, I endorse this idea and I approve this. And I'm wondering if there's anything in the Hammurabi Code that represents anything like that. That's a good
question. I'll send him that in advance, because he does like it when he gets to time to prepare for it, in case he could come up with even better arguments for whatever he wants to say. So I'll shoot him an email on that one.
Okay, cool.
Great. Well, cool. So everyone, please go like and subscribe to Craig's channel. Also, it's in the description. He's got a really cool channel he's trying to build up. We want to get it to 1,000 followers in the next 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
So we're going to work really hard. So if all of you who are watching this, all 14,
tell 1,000 of your friends.
Tell 1,000 of your friends. Spread the word. Please spread the word. We want 1,000 followers for Craig's channel by the end of the month. And so that sounds good to me. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Please like and subscribe. Again, I'm going to be Thursday at 7:00 p.m. Eastern. I'm having Josh on my channel, The Digital Hammurabi. And then on Friday, Craig and I are going to be on with 2 atheists, and we're going to really duke it out.
Yes.
Puck doesn't know what he's getting into.
Puck, we're going to smoke that guy. He's going to come on like, yeah, let's have a nice chat. We're going to like barbecue him from the second he steps into
If he listens to this, he's going to think we're going to barbecue him. So Puck, I hope you're not listening.
He actually chatted with me a couple times in DM. He's been watching my channel for a while, so he knows He knows how I am with atheists.
Good. Yeah, and I try to be as fair as possible. I know on Twitter I come off kind of harsh sometimes, but I'm really not that way. And especially if you get me on a channel, I'm definitely not harsh.
Well,
when
you're in person, you have the softy personality. But yeah, on Twitter, you're more likely to be combative. You probably don't connect it to actually being combative as like in real, like, because you almost never are when you're talking to people one-on-one, I don't think.
No, I don't think I've ever been. I just am not like that in real. I mean, I'm just not like that. I think on Twitter, because you can't see the person and put the whole context together, you just might see my, I think, oh, I'm going to say something kind of edgy and I'll put this tweet out.
Right. You don't, well, that's kind of what I noticed, because I don't think I've ever seen you do that when you're talking to someone one-on-one, even if you disagree with them. So I think in Twitter, you just disconnect it from actually like you're being combative. You know what I'm saying? That's how
last night I decided I'm going to put out a series of tweets to prove Jesus resurrected and the prophecies. So I just started like power tweeting a whole bunch of things, and I'm sure it rubbed some people wrong if they're not believers. They're getting it and thinking, "Oh my gosh, what's she doing?" But that's sort of my tweets out to the world.
But you could be talking to Aaron Ra, and he would be foaming at the mouth about the resurrection, and you would never adopt the same type of, you would just be like, "Oh, I understand what you mean, Aaron Ra." And he'd be like, "Rah, Christians are so stupid. The resurrection's so fake. You got no evidence." You'd be like, "Yeah, I understand your point."
Yeah, no. Aaron Ra's like, Christians have faith without any evidence. No, we have evidence. No, Christians have faith without any evidence. So, yeah, he's got an interesting approach. So, okay, well, everybody, I really appreciate that you came on. Let me switch this up here. Stop sharing, and please like and subscribe, and do come again. I gotta find the screen.
Yes.
I gotta get back to the one. So.
And come again next. Are we doing this? Are we doing something next Monday? Come next Monday.
Yeah, next Monday. I'd have to do it a little later in the afternoon next Monday.
Yeah, it's
because
fine.
I'm starting my teaching weeks. So, but yeah, let's definitely do it next Monday. So next Monday we'll be back on to chat about something good. We're going to find a good video to review. Could be the one he mentioned with Matt Dillahunty. So we will see.
Yeah, with Veckel. That's a good one. Whichever one you want.
Yeah, sounds good. Oh, Digital Hammurabi is in the chat, Craig.
Oh, cool. Is it Mrs. Hammurabi or Dr. Josh?
I don't know. Dr. Josh. Yeah.
Is
Dr.
it the better
Josh,
half
I heard
or
that I don't
the worse
skewer
half?
people. Wait, what'd you say?
Is it the better half or the worse half? Which one?
Yeah. No, the funny thing about the funny thing about him being in the chat right now is that we were just talking about him. Dr. Josh, I have to know where your ear's ringing.
Yeah, we were just talking about you.
So so you'll have to go back and listen to that last part.
In my analysis of your thing with because I've been defending Dr. Josh, and I was like, I start off like Dr. Josh versus S.J. Thomas and blood.
It is
sport.
Dr. Josh. Oh,
What's
yeah,
up,
blood.
Dr. Josh? And I'm like, they went at it, and I start pretending like you guys tried to kill each other. But then I defend him, because if you have a normal conversation with Dr. Josh, I've never seen him be combative apropos of nothing. You know what I mean?
I don't think I've ever seen him be combative. I know Skylar's combative. In fact, that's like his.
Well, yeah, that's
it's like the good cop, bad cop. In fact, I think he might even think that the good cop, bad cop distinction. So.
Oh, that could definitely be. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so and I was even pointing out, since he's on here, but I know we're going to get going, but I was even pointing out one quick thing is I said, when I get on a channel with G-Man, see, G-Man's kind of like, when we talk about ethos, pathos, and logos, G-Man brings the emotion. Last night when I was on this thing with G-Man, I mean, he was like all full of emotion. So was Veckel. And I think you bring some emotion. So I think we're also pretty good combination when we do these kind of things.
I bring me? I'm bringing emotion?
Oh, I think you do, in a good way.
Okay.
Like you bring you got passion, is the way I'm trying to say it.
Yes.
Like you bring some passion into it, and you care about what you say a lot. And so I think that shows, it comes through.
So is Dr. Josh here? Should I say the question over again?
He said it was very, oh yeah, that's a great point. Wait, he is here. He says it's very nice of us. He's still here. So yeah, ask that question, see what he says.
Yes. Okay.
So prepared for it for Thursday, Dr. Josh.
So here's the question. And if I don't say this question all that well, I'll try to phrase it better. But like in the Hammurabi Code, there's the crazy, like weird stuff, because it's, the times were so barbaric and horrific. So some of their legal code is like, what on earth are these guys talking about? But then in the Old Testament, there's some of that. And then there's some of like what I think you would agree is like actual righteousness or actual values, actual ethics. Is there any of those type of things in the Hammurabi Code? Is there anything you'd point to and go like, well, here it says love your neighbor as yourself. Here it says like, do good unto the immigrant, things like that. I'm curious. I don't know. My guess is there isn't, or there isn't very much, but I have no idea.
Yeah, or forgive people. Forgive people who sinned against you, that sort of thing. So
right. If there's any like actual like thing that you would point to and go, see, they were actually trying to work at spiritual growth or being more moral, better people, or anything like that.
Yeah. Craig, I didn't realize we were going 2 hours and 20 minutes here. This is a long.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really do have things to do, just like you do too. So, all right. So everybody, Josh, please prepare the answer for Craig's question if you want to answer that on Thursday when we chat. So that'll be great. So I'm going to end the stream. Here we go. Okay, now it's over.